Chapter 240. There was still an hour before the opening ceremony. The lawn square in front of the auditorium was filled with people. Thousands of freshmen were looking forward to the beautiful scenery of St. Freya Academy. But in the corner of the square, the atmosphere was somewhat different. "What are you kneeling for? Stand up." The black-haired boy supported Paul's knees with his cane. His cold and majestic voice came from above. Paul, who had his head lowered, was slightly stunned. The next moment, the heavy pressure on his body suddenly disappeared. He could not help but raise his head in surprise. "Luoya," Paul muttered the boy's name with a surprised expression. The current Luoya gave him a completely different feeling from before. In the past, Luoya gave him the impression of a gentle and elegant aristocrat who liked to read books. But now, the Luoya gave him the impression of majesty. Under the faint light of the spell, the boy's golden eyes shone. His black hair and clothes fluttered in the wind. His calm expression and firm eyes seemed to be silently telling something, showing that he was far more experienced than ordinary people. Under Luoya's powerful appearance, the nearby shouts gradually subsided. Carlo and Wright looked at each other with surprise. They looked at the unknown Luoya and hesitated for a moment. On the other side, the boy also sighed silently in his heart. Unexpectedly, the plot had changed. Luoya recalled the plot in Recorder's Eye, and his heart was full of doubts. Normally, the last part of the first act of Paul Ackerman's story should be that Paul pretended to agree to drop out of school during his conversation with the other party, and then sprinted toward the auditorium while shouting for help. This kind of behavior was quite in line with Paul's current strength. After all, as a level 5 source ranker, facing 2 level 4 source rankers, there was no other way but to run. In fact, this kind of behavior did attract the attention of the Noah Iyer, and then Miss Angel came to the rescue and got to know Paul. Such a big scene, no matter what, the Noah Iyer must have seen it. "Forget it, I'll just treat it as doing good deeds." Luoya helplessly turned his head and looked at Carlo, who was looking at him vigilantly. The latter hesitated for a moment and cautiously began to ask questions. "This student, you should be a new student, right? May I ask who you are?" "Luoya Akkad of the Theocracy of St. Maester." "Theocracy? Then why are you meddling in other people's business?" Upon hearing Luoya's name, the two men heaved a sigh of relief. Although the Church of St. Maester was powerful, they couldn't do anything to the Austin nobles. After learning about Luoya's background, the two men's tone became even more unbridled. "Kid, I advise you to mind your own business. This is an internal affair of the Austin Empire." "That's right. This matter has nothing to do with you. Please leave quickly." Carlo warned with an unkind expression, and the nearby students also started to talk about it. Paul, as the prince of the Austin Empire, didn't have a good relationship with Luoya's country. In the distance, the students surrounding the blonde girl also frowned. "Your Highness, Lord Luoya, it doesn't matter. Just keep watching." Noah Iyer looked at the figure in front of her and gradually relaxed her brows. With a smile, she stopped everyone's doubts. In the distance, the black-haired boy stole a glance at Miss Angel and heaved a sigh of relief. Although the reality of the situation had changed, and Paul wouldn't run to Noah Iyer's side, Luoya still chose to stop this farce. There were two main reasons for this. The most important one was that Luoya felt that in this situation, even if Paul didn't cry for help, Noah Iyer wouldn't turn a blind eye to it. Having known Noah Iyer for several years, Luoya knew Heathcliff too well. Although Noah Iyer often couldn't control his desire to abuse her, putting aside this small flaw, Noah Iyer's nature was just like her origin substance. She was kind and righteous. In the face of this kind of ugly bullying, no matter who the victim was, Noah Iyer would intervene. And the other reason was Roja's own perception of the situation. "You guys are a little disgusting." "What did you say?" In front of the two unfriendly people, the black-haired boy said with disgust as if he was looking at something disgusting. "Bullying the weak." In terms of pure blood, the two of you have perfectly inherited the fine tradition of the Austin Empire. Your purity is so high that I want to vomit. Hee, I didn't expect to be provoked here. Boy, you should have thought about the consequences of doing this, right? Be careful. After listening to Luoya's straightforward words, Carlo, who had no restrictions on the nobles of the theocracy, couldn't stand it anymore. He condensed the curse power on his body, and his right hand swelled into the claws of a giant beast and swung at the black-haired boy. Paul, who was on the side, hurriedly reminded him, but surprisingly, the boy didn't move at all. You want to fight? Sure, but not with me. Chapter 241. On the square, amidst the beast shadows and chaos, Lillian Aikman and Luoya Akat looked at each other across the air. Their eyes were full of indifference. Don't trust Aikman. The black-haired boy looked at the woman in the high place, and the message he saw on the tree man in the Sharon forest flashed in his heart. There was no doubt that the message from the ancestors had a great impact on Luoya. It made him more vigilant when facing the Aikman family except for Paul, who was an illegitimate child, especially Lillian Aikman. Everyone knew the situation in the Austin Empire today. Whether it was the eldest prince, Lucas Aikman, or the second prince, Aubrey Aikman, they were all well-known trash. They couldn't do anything at all. The only threat he could meet was Lillian. Although they only looked at each other once, Luoya could clearly feel the hostility and indifference in Lillian's purple eyes. In fact, his body was indeed shrouded under the pressure of this Lady Purple Rose, so he could basically be sure of one thing. As one of the heroines, Lillian Aikman, who had no contact with Luoya at all, was basically the same as in the original work. She still had inexplicable hostility toward him, and Luoya had no intention of gaining the favor of this Lady Purple Rose now. After roping in Noa Iyer, Xia Lot, and A.I. Lizzie, Lillian alone could no longer pose a threat to him. On the other hand, even if Luoya wanted to gain her favor, it would be a waste of effort because he didn't have the conditions to do so. Lillian Aikman looked incomparably cold, but she was actually a hidden brother complex. As for why it was hidden, it was because she had never had a brother so far. In the game, Recorder's Eye, Lillian's favor for Paul was not high at the beginning, but as time passed, Lillian's brother complex would gradually awaken. As her brother, Paul would receive more and more care from her. It was almost an easy win. Regarding this situation, Luoya concluded that it should be the rebound caused by Lillian's extreme lack of familial love since childhood. Her obsession with her family was beyond imagination, and regardless of their real blood relationship, Paul was at least her brother in name. As for caring about her, being completely different from the rest of the Austin royal family and so on, these were all secondary in Luoya's eyes. A Seisai, who didn't know how to do that? With an ice beauty sister who treated you wholeheartedly, who wouldn't want to be a Seisai? If they weren't her family, they wouldn't be able to gain her trust, and they wouldn't be able to break through her impenetrable heart. Everything else would be for naught. The lack of hardware made Luoya give up on building a good relationship with Lillian. At the same time, the black-haired young lady had the same intention. She recalled the long-awaited letter from her father. Do not approach the Akat family. This was an order from His Majesty, and as a princess, Lillian had to obey it. But the young lady didn't think that this approach was a physical approach. It was obvious that if there were people in this world who would cause problems for Lillian by getting close to them, the Austin Empire wouldn't simply send a letter. This approach should mean getting close to them, which meant that Lillian mustn't interact with the Akat family. Even though she didn't know the reason, if that was the case, avoiding contact or maintaining vigilance and hostility would be the simplest way. As a matter of fact, Lillian had decided not to have any interactions with Luoya and Luoya. But she didn't expect Luoya to appear beside Paul. Conspiracy. This was the first word that popped up in Lillian's mind after discovering Luoya by Paul's side. One was the illegitimate son of the Austin Empire who had just been found half a year ago, while the other was the son of a marquis who had received a complete aristocratic education in the Saint Maester theocracy. Be it their past experiences or the environment they grew up in, they were worlds apart. Lillian didn't think that they would have anything in common, let alone become friends within the first hour of school. All in all, it was a big problem for someone from the Saint Maester theocracy to get close to Paul, the illegitimate son of the emperor. No matter if Luoya's target was Paul or if he approached her through Paul, it could be determined that he had malicious intentions. After confirming this, Lillian's gaze turned colder. After the two of them stared at each other for a few moments, Luoya turned to the huge monster that extended from the cane and ordered. "Spit them out." Following Luoya's order, the mouths of two of the Hydra's heads began to squirm. A few seconds later, the two heads spat out two human-shaped objects mixed with mucus like phlegm. They were Carlo and Luoya, who were swallowed by the Hydra. At that moment, Carlo's clothes were tattered, and he was unconscious on the lawn. His entire body was covered in sticky saliva. But even though he was in a sorry state, there were no obvious wounds on his body. Luoya didn't care about the two half-naked men on the ground. After spitting them out, the Hydra staff began to shrink rapidly under his control. It didn't take long for it to turn back into a simple cane. On the other side, the students of the Academy Security Department who were responsible for maintaining law and order rushed over. They surrounded Luoya vigilantly while checking on the condition of the two men. "They just fainted. They should be fine. Is that so? Carry them away." The students of the security department heaved a sigh of relief after confirming that the two men were still alive. The atmosphere in the vicinity also relaxed a lot. After the black-haired young man dispelled the rebirth body skill of the Hydra staff, he looked up at the attic again. This time, the hostility in the gaze from above faded slightly. The reason why Luoya took the initiative to let the two idiots go wasn't out of kindness. In fact, he wanted to express to Lillian that he wasn't hostile because the Academy Security Department who maintained law and order in the square belonged to Lillian's organization. If one observed carefully, one would notice that every member of the security department had the Purple Rose faction logo on their chest. The degree of student autonomy in St. Freya Academy was quite high, and law and order had always been maintained by the highest-ranked ringbearers and their factions. The head of the Academy Security Department this year was Lillian. To put it bluntly, the entire academy was her territory. Whoever dared to make trouble would be smashing her territory. Unless one wanted to confront her head-on, Luoya had to give in. After the security department determined that the two men were not in danger, Lillian's coercion weakened a lot. The black-haired girl's eyes moved slowly and turned to the Hydra staff in Luoya's hand. An ancient curse item? Lillian's purple pupils contracted slightly. The aura of the Hydra staff just made her feel a slight threat. For a curse item, it was rare for her to be vigilant. Chapter 242. Looking at the refreshed values in the system, Luoya couldn't help but look around. Sure enough, he found that many people in the crowd were green. Obviously, the first large favorability value was from Paul, who he directly helped, and the rest of the small amounts were from the nearby students. Looking at the favorability value, Luoya couldn't help but sigh that there were still many good people in the world. Thinking of this, the young boy's mood improved a little, and he looked at Paul with a faint smile. "It's nothing, I just don't like to see the strong bullying the weak." "Brother Luoya, no, I should be younger than you." Luoya smiled helplessly and waved his hand. Under the gaze of the crowd, he helped Paul up. The bullied boy looked up with a touched face, but when he saw the scene behind Luoya, he was stunned. At the same time, a familiar voice sounded in Luoya's ears. "Indeed, I don't like it either, but you're making too much noise." "Huh?" A helpless yet doting sigh echoed in his ears, causing the black-haired youth to blink his eyes and turn his head, just in time to see a golden figure strolling over from the separated crowd. Noah Eyre Heathcliff slowly approached under the encirclement of the nobles. Unlike the last time on the street, Luoya was calmer this time. Luoya had just liberated the Hydra. After such an obvious disturbance, Noah Eyre was bound to appear. Because Luoya belonged to the theocracy of Saint Mestre, strictly speaking, he was under her jurisdiction. This year, because of Noah Ayer's enrollment, the nobles of the theocracy of Saint Mestre who could afford to pay for the tuition fee would pay for Heathcliff's tuition fee. The number of new students far exceeded that of previous years, and their task was naturally to protect Her Royal Highness, although Her Royal Highness didn't need protection at all. As the only son of the Akate family, Luoya's status in the theocracy of Saint Mestre was still very high. Coupled with his personal relationship and scandals with Noah Ayer since childhood, Luoya could be said to be second only to the theocracy's nobles, so to a certain extent, his actions represented the theocracy. The noise nearby became louder after Noah Ayer walked over. Noah Ayer's beauty and holiness were like a bright light in the dark, and the grace of a ruler was even more impressive. The students who didn't know the girl's identity whispered to each other, and the new students in the distance were also attracted by the appearance of Hydra, and people kept running over to watch the show. Noah Ayer's eyes swept across the crowd, and at a glance, he found several girls who were staring at Luoya with strange gazes. Obviously, Luoya's performance of punishing evil and promoting good attracted the attention of many people, many of whom were sympathetic and opposed to school violence. TSK, such a situation really happened. Noah Ayer was speechless, but still maintained a smile on his face. Under everyone's gaze, Miss Angel walked to the boy's side and affectionately pulled his tie, while her other hand pinched his cheek. Noah Ayer? You didn't come with me, and you didn't even look for me after coming here. This is your punishment, you rebellious minister. A somewhat angry and cute voice came from his ear, making Luoya, who was being pinched, stunned. Many people nearby and Paul behind Luoya were also stunned. Wait, why is this plot a bit familiar? Paul, who was shocked by Noah Ayer's charm, was stuffed with dog food before he could react. He immediately recalled the scene of Xia Luot, and his expression immediately became strange, but after looking at Luoya in front of him, he was relieved. Indeed, such a girl can only be matched by an upright and powerful person like Luoya. What a good person. Paul recalled what Luoya had done before, and his heart was moved again. On the other side, Noah Ayer was secretly observing the effect of this dog food attack, and she found that many girls were retreating, especially after hearing about Noah Ayer's identity. In this world, not many people dared to snatch a man from the future queen of Saint Maester, not to mention that Noah Ayer's appearance was so outstanding, and the sense of holiness that belonged to the angel bloodline was something that others couldn't replicate. Of course, there were still people who were unwilling to give up. Noah Ayer understood this very well. After all, she knew how fragrant Luoya was. As for those who stared at her in the crowd, they were directly ignored by her. It's not that I don't want to look for you, it's just that, I met a new friend. A new friend. After listening to Luoya's explanation, the blonde girl's blue eyes turned and glanced at the boy behind Luoya. Suddenly, she remembered that when Paul was being targeted, Noah Ayer once saw Luoya looking at her in the crowd. I say, you didn't do it on my behalf, right? You can say that. Is that so? Chapter 243. When the Princess of Saint Maester's kiss landed on Luoya's face, it was as if the air in this corner of the great hall had stopped. Luoya felt the warmth on his face, and his brain turned white. His brain temperature began to rise rapidly. He never thought that Noah Ayer would do such a thing in front of so many people. Although the Princess of Saint Maester was very open with Luoya in private, on the surface, she had always been a gentle and steady representative. In the 5 years since they met, Noah Ayer had never exposed their intimate relationship in public. After all, as the successor of a large country, it wasn't a good thing to expose one's love too obviously. But today, perhaps because she felt threatened by the surrounding people, Miss Angel's aggressive behavior was far more aggressive than before. However, what Luoya didn't know was that the Princess of Saint Maester's reward wasn't limited to this. While Luoya's face was burning, Noah Ayer's blue eyes slightly narrowed. In the next moment, a moist feeling suddenly appeared in Luo Ya's mind. The black-haired youth's body suddenly trembled, and the girl took advantage of the situation to stand up and separate from him. With a smile on her face, she began to observe Luo Ya's reaction. "Noa you." At the end of the light kiss, the young man who was licked by the tip of the tongue covered his face and his face instantly turned red. After the light kiss ended, the surroundings became noisy. The gossipy crowd discussed animatedly. The young men who fell in love and fell out of love in less than a minute beat their chests and stomped their feet. The young ladies who glanced at the black-haired young man quietly gnashed their teeth. Only Luo Ya, in this chaos, felt dizzy from the heat. He used his hand to wipe away the imperceptible moist stain. He wanted to open his mouth to protest against Miss Angel's nonsense, but under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he couldn't say anything. He could only stutter with a red face and trembling lips. The pleasure of having an affair in front of so many people made the two's hearts restless. Noa looked at the red-faced youth, and the desire in her heart suddenly exploded. That's enough. What if someone finds out? In the eyes of outsiders, the two of them were whispering sweet nothings. In fact, the content was far more explosive than people imagined. Unfortunately, that was the end of it. "What are you two doing here?" Amidst the commotion, the crowd separated once again. Xia Luot, who was on the other side of the lawn square, finally arrived. As soon as she entered, she immediately noticed that the atmosphere was not right. After hearing what Noa had done, her expression immediately changed. "Princess Noa, what did you do to my fiancé?" Isn't this Miss Xia Luot? Long time no see. What did you just say? Fiancé? Who is that? Of course it's Luo Ya. Do you even need to ask? Miss Xia Luot might have remembered wrongly. Luo Ya is not anyone's fiancé. Oh, I remember now. Your so-called fiancé, could it be that Luo Ya has a 100-year marriage contract that has no legal effect on you? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the conflict between the two girls erupted. The 5-month gap had made Charlotte angry for a long time, and Noelle, whose good mood had been disturbed, also held a grudge in her heart. The two of them had a war of words, neither giving way to the other. The onlookers were dumbfounded and excited at the same time. On the distant rooftop, the white-bearded old man with a long staff looked over and smiled knowingly. What a group of energetic children. Dean Antonio stroked his beard and sighed. Behind him was a group of teaching staff in uniform. However, unlike Antonio, who had a gratified look on his face, the teaching staff were not as relaxed. Rather, they were under a lot of pressure. The teaching staff witnessed the commotion, but none of them could intervene because St. Freya Academy was a student autonomous academy. Unless it was an emergency, the teaching staff couldn't easily intervene in student affairs, especially when Lillian was present. There was no need to intervene at all. There were not many high-level extraordinaires even among the teachers, and Lillian's level 3 source had a different meaning. The feeling just now. Her Royal Highness' strength has probably surpassed the concept of level 3 source. Yes, but as the preceptor of the Management Academy, this is also a good thing, isn't it? Yes, but thinking about it this way, the student she suppressed is not simple either. To be able to resist such a strong pressure, the teachers behind Antonio began to discuss the incident just now. Many teachers looked at Luo Ya's Hydra staff and began to raise questions to the dean. Dean, isn't that student staff too dangerous? If it goes out of control, indeed, that should be an ancient curse vessel. The teachers were talking about the origin of Roja's cane and worried about the possibility of losing control, but Antonio didn't care about it. Out of control? No, his control is very mature. The monster's behavior seems fierce, but in fact, it is all under his control. The proof is that after such a commotion, no innocent people were hurt at all. The old man looked at the boy in the crowd with a smile, then turned to look at the teachers behind him. And when it comes to danger, many experimental projects in this city are far more dangerous. Instead of paying attention to a student's curse vessel, it is better to work hard to control the experimental accident. Otherwise, if our purple rose really convenes a council to vote on who to expel, there is nothing I can do. Antonio's warning joke made many people's eyes flicker, and it also stopped some people from studying the Hydra staff. After warning the overly curious people, the old man's gaze returned to the square. Chapter 244. The opening ceremony was a process that every school had to go through since ancient times, whether it was in the past or the present. Generally speaking, the more impressive the school was, the more extravagant the ceremony would be. And in St. Freya Academy, this law was well proven. There were thousands of people in the audience. The Lord of Leinster City personally read the opening speech, and the leaders of the various sects took turns to take the stage. They were all high-level extraordinaires. Although the leaders of these sects would not personally teach the class, it was rare enough for them to gather together and show their faces. One must know that not all schools were in a cooperative relationship. Many of them competed with each other, and even had opposite ideologies. The disputes between scholars were not small at all, and were even more intense. Just like the dispute over the nature of light in the previous world, the particle and wave schools could not wait to smash each other's heads flat. Shia's scholars were the same. Due to the powerful offensive nature of curses, if they really attacked, they would either die or be injured, so they could usually maintain restraint. However, it was more dangerous when they gathered together for a meeting. In the past, there were academic exchanges that went too far, and it was seamlessly linked to the martial arts conference. Each representative adhered to the spirit of, true knowledge comes from practice, and fought fiercely on the spot. Scholars were more stubborn, and some of them were not good with words. When they were angered by others, they would easily go to extremes. Compared to them, the instructors specially hired from the Kingdom of Knights, Ponde, were much better. Generally speaking, they would only scold and not hit. After all, unlike the depressed scholars who did research at home, most of the knights had traveled the world and experienced the cruel beating of society. Naturally, they were more tactful. If there was any occasion that could make these people put down their past grudges and settle down, it was basically this auditorium, because this auditorium generally only had two purposes, to welcome the new and to dismiss the old. Aside from welcoming the new, seizing the new students' resources was the only and biggest goal of each school every spring. It represented the fresh blood and the future of a school, and the dismissal of the old was even more important. Other than the heirs of the St. Freya Academy who needed to return home to inherit their fiefs, there were also a group of second, third, and even fourth, fifth, and sixth sons. In addition, there were also local students, children of merchants, students who had fallen in love with the city after 4 years of study, and so on. Every year, there would be a large number of talents to be recruited after graduation. At this time, the elders of the school would suddenly become the head of the Human Resources Department. Just like animals entering the mating season, they would also enter the most intimate time of the year. During the opening ceremony and graduation ceremony, the representatives of each sect were all smiles, trying their best to leave the best impression on the students. Of course, flying lanterns and banners were also needed. There were also plenty of loudspeakers and people standing on the streets to snatch people. Their only goal was to get as many people as they could. After all, if they had fewer people, their opponents might have more. Luoya looked at the sect representative on the stage and ridiculed him in his heart, but he didn't dare to say a word. At this time, the black-haired youth's face was serious, his body was straight, and his eyes were straight. He looked like a good student who was seriously listening to the person on stage. As a person who had been a student for most of his life in his previous life, Luoya naturally wasn't really interested in the entrance ceremony. The reason why he was so good now was mainly because the situation forced him to. At this time, the black-haired youth was sitting in the middle of a long row of seats. On his left was Noah Iyer Heathcliff and a group of officials and attendants. On his right was Xia Luot Sorofia and a large number of attendants. The two groups of people each occupied one side. From the moment they entered the auditorium, the blonde girl and the reddish-brown girl refused to budge an inch. They were fighting fiercely for Luoya's seat. Seeing this, the black-haired youth suddenly had an idea. He suddenly remembered his good friend, Mr. Paul. But when he turned around, he saw that Mr. Paul had followed the crowd and left with an encouraging smile. "Brother Luoya, you can do it." Vaguely, Luoya seemed to have heard Paul's inner voice. Obviously, after Paul learned about Noah Ayer's identity and saw Xia Luo rushing over, he felt that it was very awkward for him to be here. So, he silently left by himself. But he probably didn't know that it was actually when Luoya needed him the most. "Fuck. Why did you run away?" Looking at the youth disappearing into the crowd, Luoya gritted his teeth. After the Paul shield was gone, he had to face the firepower of the two girls. After some bargaining, the two sides could only compromise, and the final result was this situation. In the middle, Luoya's face was calm, but his heart was trembling. Especially towards the blonde girl, Luoya's guard was quite deep. The Noah Ayer seemed to like that kind of stimulation, especially his frightened appearance, which made the Noah Ayer's face turn red. Of course, Xia Luo on the other side also couldn't be underestimated. From a certain point of view, there was nothing that she didn't dare to do. After all, there was nothing more outrageous than kidnapping. Moreover, from the perspective of the academy, Xia Luo's family was the #1 financial backer. If the big miss committed a crime, the academy would be overestimating her ability to turn a blind eye. In this crisis, Luoya didn't even dare to put his hands on the armrest. He sat upright and still throughout the whole process. But what surprised him was that the two girls seemed to be concerned about the nearby population density and influence. They actually restrained themselves and didn't do anything out of line. As time passed, the black-haired youth felt a little relieved. He turned his attention back to the opening ceremony. After a large group of school representatives went through the motions, the main point of the opening ceremony finally arrived. With the sound of a wooden stick hitting the ground, a tall old man wearing a luxurious robe walked onto the stage. The moment he appeared, Luoya clearly felt the atmosphere in the auditorium change. The whispering students stopped making noise, and the teenagers who weren't sitting properly also straightened up. Almost everyone in the auditorium subconsciously began to adjust their state of mind to make their expressions and attitudes more in line with the etiquette. Antonio, the headmaster of St. Freya Academy, was a name that was widely known in Xia, and even in the Kingdom of Scholars. There were two main reasons for this. The first was naturally his strength. No one knew exactly how strong he was because he hadn't fought for many years, but it was certain that he was one of the top combatants in the human world in Xia. The second reason was that he had lived for a long time. If Luoya remembered correctly, this white-bearded old man should be around 400 years old this year, which was quite old among the existing extraordinaires. Although an extraordinaire's lifespan would continue to increase as their bodies mutated, in fact, the increase in lifespan of low-level extraordinaires was limited. High-level extraordinaires, on the other hand, had to shoulder a lot of social responsibilities, especially in the past few hundred years when the human world was in turmoil. Many high-level extraordinaires had died on the battlefield of the mutants' westward invasion. In a war, the most important thing was money and manpower. As the largest training base for human talents, the Kingdom of Scholars naturally couldn't afford to lose. Although there were many extraordinaires in each school, the proportion of those who could actually fight on the battlefield was not high. Therefore, after several wars, the Kingdom of Scholars had the most surviving extraordinaires. As a human powerhouse, Antonio had also fought on the battlefield during the last racial war and achieved very good results. However, as the saying went, there were internal and external troubles. Every time there was chaos, the shortcomings of the Kingdom of Scholars would be exposed. There would always be some people who would jump out and cause trouble. Antonio had no choice but to lead people to pacify the internal situation and stabilize the foundation. This way, his position would naturally be less dangerous. As one grew older, one's seniority would be higher. However, as the speaker of the Kingdom of Scholars, although old, Antonio was very close to the people. For many years, his support among the people had been very high. During his tenure as the headmaster of the academy, he had repeatedly encouraged the students to strengthen their autonomy and advocated for de-dogmatism. Therefore, he was also very popular among the students. With such a figure on the stage, the students below would more or less cooperate with him. Under the attention of the crowd, Antonio, the headmaster of the academy, began his speech. However, the theme of Antonio's speech was unexpectedly not some chicken blood injection. Instead, it was a little heavy. The responsibility of growth. This was the theme of Antonio's speech. Dear students, the moment you stepped into this auditorium, it means that you have become the pride of the world, ahead of most of your peers in the human world. In the next few years, the gap between you and the outside world will only grow bigger and bigger. You can cheer and be proud, but don't forget one thing. When you are at the top of the human race, the pressure that the race shares on you will become sharper and heavier. As students of St. Freya Academy, I hope that you will not only grow in strength, but also in your sense of responsibility. The source substance gives us strength and lets us know which direction to work towards. However, since ancient times, there have been an endless number of fallen people. Why are there so many people who have gone astray in the same direction? Because they often pursue their own interests. When they take risks out of desperation, they forget about their family, forget about their country, and forget about the human situation. When responsibility is covered in dust, indulgence blinds their minds and leads them to destruction. Listening to Antonio's speech, the young man's expression gradually became serious. To be honest, Luoya felt that this speech was more suitable for graduation. After all, most of these new students had just stepped out of their comfort zone. In many of their eyes, the world was still bright and beautiful. Not to mention fallen people and evil cultists, these young masters and young ladies had probably not even seen a criminal before. Not everyone was like Luoya, who was watched by evil cultists from a young age and constantly moved forward through trials of life and death. In the end, these words were still a little too early for most people at this age. However, as an educator, Antonio should be very clear about these things. So why did he still say it? The deeper meaning behind it, Luoya's golden pupils slightly narrowed as he silently pondered. Chapter 245. Based on the current situation, the Shia country that Luoya was in was relatively peaceful. Although the situation between the small countries changed from time to time, the relationship between the big countries was still stable. Therefore, in this era, the freshmen who had just reached adulthood had not seen much bloodshed. In fact, if it weren't for his bloodline, Luoya himself wouldn't have seen any war. This showed the importance of the bloodline of the Akhat family. Awakening and not awakening were two completely different paths, and the end point was probably as different as heaven and earth. In this aspect, the Heathcote family was better. Thinking of this, Luoya couldn't help but sigh. Nu'a Ayer's strength was reasonable. After all, not all the royal families dared to send their heirs to the front line, let alone really fight the monsters. According to Luoya's guess, in the years after the problems on the Eastern Front, Nu'a Ayer should have more combat experience than him, or at least more combat experience than him. On the other hand, Luoya's advantage was the kind of battles that hovered between life and death. One focused on quantity, while the other focused on quality. It could only be said that each had its own advantages. As for setting his sights on the human race and assuming his own responsibilities, if he didn't know about the existence of the 6 disasters, perhaps Luoya wouldn't have thought about it. It could only be said that different experiences led to different perceptions. Although Dean Antonio's words were profound, they didn't feel real to the freshmen present. The old man must have a purpose for saying these things in advance, and it wasn't difficult for Luoya to guess the purpose. It was probably to prepare for the war with the aliens. But if that's the case, does it mean that Dean Antonio is not optimistic about the situation on the front line? Does he know something that others don't, or is he just saying it as a precaution? a deeper layer of thinking made Luoya frown. While the teenager was thinking, the white-haired old man also finished his speech and walked off the stage in the warmest applause of the audience. The dean's words seemed to have a deeper meaning. Noah Iyer, who had been on the front lines for quite some time, noticed something different. On the other side, Xia Luot, who had witnessed the 6 calamities, together with Luoya, had a complicated expression on her face. Indeed, but most of the people here don't understand. It was rare for the reddish-brown-haired girl to agree with her love rival. Her emerald eyes swept across the entire place, and she couldn't help but smile bitterly when she saw the brilliant smiles on the freshmen's faces. Luoya listened to the words of the 2 girls and didn't say anything. As time passed, the applause gradually subsided and a new figure walked onto the stage. The moment she appeared, the audience fell into complete silence. It was a girl with long black hair wearing a dark military uniform. Her top was buttoned with golden tassels, and her slender waist was wrapped by a leather belt. Her legs were wrapped in black stockings under a short skirt that didn't reach her knees for ease of movement. A small cloak with a standing collar fluttered behind her. It was a sharp contrast with her body that was outlined by the military uniform. However, the temperament of the young girl did not match her attire. Her regular facial features carried a faint coldness, and her deep purple eyes were filled with mystery as if they contained infinite wisdom. On her right hand, there was an exquisite and small ring in the shape of a blossoming rose, with an amethyst gem embedded in the center, reflecting the brilliance of the young girl's eyes. Lillian Ackman, this was the girl's name, and also the name of the ring bearer who was currently in charge of this academy. As soon as she appeared, she attracted everyone's attention and immediately made the freshmen clamor. Who is that person? What a beautiful senior, it's Her Royal Highness. It had to be said that even Shia was still universal when it came to judging a person's appearance. Lillian's temperament as an ice beauty was so compatible with the military uniform that many people had a good impression of her at first sight. The students whispered to each other endlessly. Even Luoya, who was full of vigilance against her, couldn't help but admire her in his heart. She was indeed beautiful. Normally, as an Austin aristocrat, Lillian would not wear a short skirt. The reason why she appeared on the stage in this dress was actually that this was not a military uniform, but the uniform of St. Freya Academy's security department. As a public security department, the Academy's security department was likely to fight during the course of duty. Girls' long skirts naturally couldn't be worn at this time, so they imitated the female military uniforms of various countries to design a uniform. Of course, as the uniform of the security department, its role was not only beautiful but also good protection. It could already be regarded as a curse vessel. The security department was rich, but all this was based on the premise that they had a strong leader. At this time, Lillian was also speaking on the stage as a student representative. St. Freya Academy's Rose Council Speaker, head of the Academy's security department, Lillian Ackman. As a student representative, I represent all the students to welcome the new batch of students who are about to enter the school. Compared with Antonio's previous speech, Lillian's speech was quite ordinary. It was the same old speech of a normal opening ceremony. However, for the freshmen, Lillian's words were easier to understand, and the beautiful seniors' welcome was indeed easy to make a good impression on them. Of course, this kind of good impression did not exist near Luoya. Looking at the girl under the spotlight in front of her, the blonde angel's expression was cold, and her blue eyes were alert and vigilant. The previous confrontation between Lillian and Luoya in the square made Noah Iyer feel uneasy. On the other side, although the brown-haired elf lady did not catch the confrontation scene, because of the national enmity, she did not have a good impression of the Austin royalty. Perhaps the atmosphere here was too different from the surroundings. During the speech, Lillian's eyes stopped here more than once. When she saw Luoya's seat, she couldn't help but squint slightly. Normally, as a subordinate of Noah Iyer, Luoya should sit on the left side of Noah Iyer, but now he was sandwiched between Noah Iyer and Xia Luot. This position had already explained many things. It seemed that the information was wrong. In this situation, instead of saying that he was too timing, it was better to say that he was being fought over. Lillian's purple eyes swept over the situation on Luoya's side, but then a question arose in her heart. Why did this happen? Normally, even if the heirs of two countries fell in love with the same person, they wouldn't fight so openly. Was it a dispute of personal feelings? Or did the Akkad family have something that they must obtain? Lillian, who had never experienced such intense feelings, couldn't understand the two girls. However, this did not affect her judgment of Luoya's power. Judging from the current situation, he actually had the support of both the theocracy and Luo Kyer, which was rare even in the hundreds of years of St. Freya Academy's history. Chapter 246. Enchanted Night. This was a term that everyone in St. Freya Academy knew. It was also the first gift that every freshman received after entering the academy. It represented opportunities and challenges, and performing well on Enchanted Night was also the goal of many students before they entered the academy. Although the name sounded scary, Enchanted Night was actually the first night that students spent in the academy. However, it was different due to the guidance elves in the curse vessel in their hands. Guidance elves, also known as little elves, were a kind of intelligent life inherited from ancient times. They were called elves, but in fact, this kind of elves did not have a specific appearance or gender. They were more like a kind of curse power with a certain level of self-consciousness. There were different opinions about the birth of little elves. Some people thought that it was a product of nature, and some said that it was the creation of some great existence. There was no specific conclusion so far. However, it was not important to most people how it came to be. They only cared about what it was used for. The guiding elves themselves were not very useful, and they were completely harmless. In most cases, they would be seen as fireflies. However, in the kingdom of scholars, guiding elves were highly valued because they were often the key to guiding others into the hidden realm. The hidden realm was a unique situation in the country of scholars. No one knew where it was located. Only by following the guidance elves could one enter. However, it was more similar to the concept of divinity or shuttling in Luoya's previous life. The guidance elves would only guide one person into the hidden realm each time. It was kind of exclusive. As a creation of curse power, they were very sensitive to the different types of curse power between people. Therefore, there was no possibility of sneaking in. The people who were guided would often disappear in a flash, and no one could follow them. The establishment of the country of scholars could be said to be due to the variety of hidden realms and ancient ruins nearby. In this area of the academy, there was a famous hidden realm, Enchanted Night. Enchanted Night could only be entered once, and it could only be entered at night. It was one of the rare hidden realms that was harmless. It was similar to a dreamlike hidden realm that mixed illusion and reality. The damage suffered in it would disappear when one returned to reality. This characteristic made it very popular among the educators in the academy. It could let the young masters and young mistresses, who had just left the protection of their families, experience the cruelty of actual combat, and could prevent them from suffering any substantial injuries as soon as they entered the school. Moreover, it did not require any manpower or material resources. If they did not use such a perfect natural secret realm, it would be a waste of the land under their feet. Although there was no problem with the ability to guide the elves, whether they were willing to work or not was another matter. After all, humans couldn't force them. They could only use curse power to make them happy like coaxing children. In fact, the teachers distributed the curse vessel to the students during the day to let the guide elves and students reach a tacit understanding. As for what would happen if he failed, then he could only drink the northwest wind and stroll around the academy for a night. Feeling the gradually intimate attitude of the elf in the curse vessel under stimulation, Luoya's face gradually became weird. Lock them up, stimulate them, and gradually become obedient. This, cough cough. The black-haired young man coughed twice and hurriedly threw some bad things out of his mind. After observing the curse vessel for a while, Luoya put it in his pocket, raised his head, and looked at the food that had just been served on the table. He was quietly relieved. As a foodie, delicious food was the source of joy in Luoya's life. Especially after obtaining extraordinary power and being able to maintain his body shape on the premise of eating to his heart's content, Luoya worked harder in this regard. However, before coming to school, the young man was a little worried. The campus cafeteria was a nightmare that Luoya couldn't get rid of in his previous life. Until now, when he recalled the campus life in his previous life, Luoya couldn't forget the dark cuisine. Spicy fried mooncake, strawberry fried celery, watermelon stewed meat. Ugh, Luoya, who was inexplicably disgusted, hurriedly stopped his memories and raised his eyes to stare at the dishes in front of him. St. Freya College was a rich college. Most of the students were aristocrats from all over the world. In terms of food, it could be said that they took good care of the students. Not only were there special restaurants from all over the world, but there were also restaurants opened by famous chefs. They even converged into a food street. It felt like a cluster of Michelin 3-star restaurants. However, considering the different family conditions of the students, naturally, not all of them were high-end restaurants. There were also student cafeterias subsidized by the school. Most of them were in the form of a buffet. Although the taste was not very high-end, it was never bad. As for why Luoya, as a superior aristocrat, would eat in this affordable cafeteria, it was naturally because of the two girls. After experiencing the two classes at the opening ceremony, Luoya could be said to be physically and mentally exhausted. Naturally, he didn't want to suffer again during the mealtime. So, as soon as the meal ended, he immediately found a reason to say goodbye to the two girls who wanted to feed him. In order not to meet them again, he slipped here. The affordable cafeteria was destined to be a place where Noa Iyer and Xia Luot couldn't come. It was not because the two were delicate. In fact, Noa Iyer had eaten military food on the Eastern Front. It obviously didn't taste good. When Xia Luot was in the Golden Ship crew, she was also very friendly in the face of seafaring food. The real reason why they couldn't come was the impact of their status. Her Royal Highness and Miss ate in the affordable cafeteria. How could the underlings go to a high-end restaurant? Obviously, any underling with a little brain would not do so. The final result could only be hundreds of people from both sides crowded in the civilian cafeteria, leaving those who really needed affordable food without food. Tasting the tender chicken cooked in his mouth, the black-haired young man nodded slightly while taking out the pendant in front of his chest. He looked at the curse vessel named Steel Amber and fell into deep thought. In addition to the flag, Roha didn't forget his other important purpose. The Entcade did say that the Sage of the Twilight was in St. Freya's College. If he is still alive, he will see the Steel Amber, whether it is good or bad, he will take action. What a beautiful pendant. Huh? The sudden praise made Luoya couldn't help but raise his head. He found that a red-haired woman had sat down across the table with a plate of food. She narrowed her light blue eyes and smiled at him meaningfully. Good afternoon, are you Luoya A. Chapter 247. On both sides of the dining table in St. Freya Academy's cafeteria, there was a pair of good-looking people looking at each other. One of them was a handsome black-haired young man, his golden pupils revealing a little confusion. The other was a tall red-haired beauty, her light blue eyes full of unknown emotions. The age gap between the two seemed to be about 10 years. It was a perfect combination of a big sister and a young man. If the two of them were to appear in a movie or TV series in his previous life, it would probably cause quite a lot of people to think about them. In fact, there were indeed a lot of students who noticed this rare combination on campus and cast their gazes over. Under the curious gaze of the crowd, Luoya held the steel amber pendant in his hand and blinked at the woman opposite him. For a moment, he couldn't react. What's going on? I just took it out, and someone is already looking for it. Is this person the scholar? No, that's impossible. Luoya observed the beautiful big sister opposite him and shook his head slowly in his heart. The issue of age wasn't a big deal. After all, The age and appearance of transcendence generally didn't match, especially women, but the difference in behavior was too big. According to Elizabeth's description, the scholar was a very cautious person. After joining the association for many years, she hadn't revealed her identity. Although the Twilight Sage Association had disappeared for hundreds of years, there was no reason for her to be so rash as to approach Luoya as soon as he took out the token. Or rather, if she was the scholar, she might temporarily stay away from him. Then, could it be another member? Or a descendant of another member? Thinking of this, Luoya's eyes lit up. He nodded with a smile on his face. Yes, I'm Luoya, a cart. May I ask who you are? My name is Chris Worth, a teacher here. I see. Hello, Teacher Chris. May I ask what's the matter? It's nothing. I just found out that I have some connections with you. We have some common acquaintances, so I came to talk to you. The red-haired beauty said so. She held a fork in her hand and pointed at the plate in front of her. On the other side, Luoya was shocked. Connections? Common acquaintances? Is it the scholar? No, wait, from the way she saw Iron Amber talking to him, could it be that she knew Cade? So Cade did say that a woman had come to him a month before Luoya went to Sharon Forest. Could that person be the teacher in front of him? Did he really encounter a descendant of the Twilight Sage Society? Luoya became excited as she thought of this. On the other side, Chris was still maintaining his elegant smile. Chris Worth, 36 years old this year, was the only son of the University of Bologna family. He graduated from St. Freya Academy 18 years ago, and since then, he had stayed in the school as a teacher. Because of his superb strength, huge connections, and far superior teaching results, he became one of the few sage mentors in the academy at the age of 30. Outstanding ability, a good family background, coupled with seductive beauty and sexy figure, the number of men pursuing Chris could form a strong company after so many years. However, she was still unmarried. It was rumored that she couldn't forget her former senior, and in fact, that was indeed the case. Kadia, Kot, was Chris' former senior, and also the person who changed her life. People today probably couldn't imagine that Chris, the youngest sage mentor in history, was once a rebellious girl when she first entered the academy. Her rebellion against her family made her full of disgust for this place, until a senior became her partner. In St. Freya Academy, it was normal for students under the same mentor to help each other. Among them, the most common pattern was for outstanding senior students to form a partnership with unsatisfactory junior students. Chris's partner was Kadia, but unlike other partners who only worked on the surface, Kadia was very serious and responsible, constantly persuading Chris to return to the right path. In the process, the two inevitably had a lot of contact and conflict, and Chris's emotions constantly changed over time, from resistance and disgust to being moved, and finally falling in love. Chris was already very talented, and in order to gain the admiration of her sweetheart, she worked even harder. Her grades and strength soared like a rocket, but unfortunately, this feeling was destined to be unreciprocated. Kadia fell in love with Luoya's mother, and because of this, he even cut off all contact with Chris and said very heartless words. After graduation, the two returned to Leinster and got married. After Kadia graduated, Chris tried hard and struggled, but she couldn't forget this feeling in her heart. She started to hate Kadia for being so heartless. However, as the saying goes, where there are gains, there are losses. In order to make up for the pain in her heart, Chris spent all her time improving her strength and training students. This was how she became a sage mentor at a young age and waited until Luoya entered the academy. The person I'm talking about, do you know who it is? With a smile on her face, Chris waited for Luoya to ask questions, ready to give him a surprise. However, she didn't expect Luoya to nod after cautiously scanning the surroundings. He knows. Chris looked at the calm Luoya and blinked. She didn't know where he heard it from. After thinking for a while, the red-haired woman asked hesitantly, could it be, he he mentioned me to you? Of course he did. Luoya recalled Cade's words in Sharon Forest and nodded firmly. What he said made Chris's heart skip a beat. Chapter 248. There are strange fluctuations in the secret realm recently. On the other side of the table, the black-haired teenager was stunned when he heard the red-haired woman's words. He couldn't help but recall the plot of Recorder's Eye in his previous life. He blinked with a puzzled expression. In Roha's previous life, the game was like a prophecy book. Now, he almost summed up a rule, that is, if you don't interfere too much, then some of the plots in the game have a high probability of repeating in reality. Of course, as Luoya entered the academy, the reference value of the prophecy book, Recorder's Eye, would definitely decrease. In fact, it was basically ineffective now in the heroine aspect. However, in the entrance ceremony, it should still be able to play its original function. However, the recent instability of the secret realm was not mentioned in the game. This is for you. The lamp oil of the Lamp of Finding is a safety device. Ignite it and follow its guidance. It will take you out of the secret realm. The red-haired woman took out a finger-sized bottle and handed it to Luoya as she spoke. The teenager reached out and took a closer look. He found that it was a wooden cylinder-like curse vessel. Judging from the touch, it was indeed liquid inside. After giving the props, Chris left a few words of advice and left. As a teacher in the academy, her behavior was actually on the verge of violating the rules. Naturally, she couldn't continue to attract others' attention here. Looking at the red-haired woman's back, the black-haired teenager couldn't help but sigh. This descendant of the Sage Society was truly a passionate person. It seemed that his ancestor was an old friend of Cade's. Perhaps he had even left some words on the Treant. He was so happy when he heard that he could contact Cade. However, he left too quickly. He didn't even have the time to ask about the scholar. Luoya looked at the lamp oil in his hand and could only regret being distracted. However, considering that both of them were in the academy, it was not urgent to ask about the scholar. Now, the opening ceremony was even more strange. While eating and playing with the pencil-sized wooden cylinder in his hand, Luoya thought for a while and felt that it was nothing. During the opening ceremony in the game, Paul was only at source level 5 just like in reality. He didn't have any cheats, so he was quickly eliminated. Moreover, there were no acquaintances in the academy. Maybe there were fluctuations in the secret realm in the game, but Paul's level was too low to reach it. And even if there were, so what? How could a mystic realm be more dangerous than a historical fragment? Thinking of this, Luoya shook her head. She put away the small wooden cylinder and left the cafeteria. She began to wander around the campus with the guide elf. There were still a few hours before Devil's Night, and the academy was filled with students wandering around with small balls in their hands. Not everyone was successful in pleasing the little elves. In fact, most of the elves in their hands were still very cold, but Luoya was an exception. At this time, beside the black-haired boy, the guide sprite was flying around with the heavy curse vessel shell. It circled around him intimately, surprising many students along the way. They came forward to ask for advice, which gave Luoya a headache. Would you believe me if I said I didn't do anything? Luoya dealt with the distressed students. Looking at this lively little thing, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He also felt a little strange. Luoya remembered that Paul spent the whole afternoon coaxing this little thing. Originally, Luoya was also prepared for a long war, but he didn't expect that the situation would become like this soon after the curse power touched it. Is it because of the source substance? Crown, source substance has the talent of training? The black-haired boy who couldn't figure it out shook his head. In any case, it was a good thing to familiarize himself with the guide elf as soon as possible. After saving a lot of time, Luoya didn't stay idle. Instead, he walked in the direction of the white building when he entered the school gate. Luoya was not an amnesiac. He naturally wouldn't forget such an incredible thing like resonance reaction. It was necessary to explore it as soon as he had time. The boy even had an inexplicable feeling of being caught in the act. The bloodline of the Akate family was exclusive. The most likely to resonate was naturally a blood relative. In fact, Luoya had begun to wonder if his father couldn't control himself when he was in the academy, and he accidentally left an illegitimate child or something. It was very melodramatic, but in theory, it wasn't impossible. The vigilant Luoya came all the way here, intending to ask about the situation here. But what he didn't expect was that this building was just an empty building with no specific purpose. According to the management here, because this building was close to the school gate and other places, it was generally fought over by various schools and organizations. After the opening season, the building would be empty again. St. Freya Academy covered a vast area, quite similar to the National Forest Park in Luoya's previous life. In addition to the well-maintained central campus, there were also many buildings built with donations from individuals over the past 900 years of the school's establishment. Some nobles even spent money to build houses specifically for living. Therefore, the situation of empty buildings was not uncommon, even serious. About an hour before the opening ceremony, who was here? There should be more students from the school's security department at that time. Of course, there were also many people from the school. Hearing Luoya's question, the black-haired boy fell into deep thought. When new students were admitted, the security department's students would be dispatched in large numbers to maintain order. This was normal. But to be honest, Luoya didn't want to deal with this department. The reason was naturally because of Lillian. Looking for someone under the eyes of the Purple Rose was not an easy thing to do. It was likely that he would be regarded as having ulterior motives. And in the end, the school's reason for looking for relatives was very strange. Actually, I have a long-lost relative here. Guess how Lillian would answer this kind of nonsense? It was probably the Princess Magnanimity that she didn't make a move. Luoya sighed and shook his head as he left. After walking a distance, he turned back to look at the building. He still couldn't feel at ease. After all, the Akate family was not prosperous, and there weren't many members. Chapter 249. When night fell, a crowd gathered at the edge of St. Freya Academy's misty forest. The noise made this gloomy place, which was rarely visited by the Academy's students, lively. The misty forest, as its name suggested, was filled with fog that contained curse power all year round. In this forest, it was difficult to distinguish directions using curse power, and one could not see the sun. Therefore, countless people had gone missing since ancient times. Therefore, the misty forest was listed as a forbidden area by the Academy. In fact, the misty forest was not only a part of St. Freya Academy. It was more accurate to say that this part of the Academy only accounted for about 10% of the total. The rest extended to the south of Leinster. Due to the extremely high concentration of magic elements, there were abundant resources. Every year, there were desperate adventurers who entered the forest hoping to get rich overnight. However, the result was often one more name added to the list of missing people. Of course, such a mysterious place naturally had some legends. For example, there was a shocking secret hidden in the forest. Such ghost stories might be a little attractive to others, but in Luoya's view, there was nothing to write home about. The reason why so many people gathered here now was that this was the entrance to the secret realm. As long as one had the help of a guide elf blessed by nature, it was still very safe to walk around the periphery of the misty forest. As for those who did not get the favor of the elf in these few hours, I can do it. Let me in. I've been preparing for a long time. Senior, give me another chance. Let me try again. In a corner outside the forest, a group of small balls of cursed beasts flew around several mentors and students. Beside them was a group of students who were either begging or dejected. In order to verify that the students had the cooperation of the elves and would not go missing after entering the forest, the mentors and members of the security department would release a special curse at the entrance to attract the guide elves. Any elves who did not meet the requirements of the cursed beasts would run away on the spot. It was like love. Without the guide elves, the students naturally could not enter the secret realm. They could only wait outside. Of course, there were occasionally some who were restless. It was said that there were stubborn students who wanted to barge in without the elves. As a result, their legs were broken before they could run into the forest. Don't worry, my dear. I will definitely get the ring and build our love nest here. Hee, Miss Xia Luo, what are you talking about? Luo Ye is my subject, and I am his protector. After I get the ring, of course he should be by my side. Outside the forest, the blonde girl looked at the reddish-brown girl with a smile. She reached out and gently tugged on Luo Ye's tie as if declaring ownership. On the other side, Xia Luo also showed a kind smile. Indeed, if your highness obtains the ring, Luo Ye will probably join your faction. But does this have anything to do with me living with my dear? As a monarch, are you going to restrict the freedom of your subordinates? Is your highness such a tyrant? Xia Luo, you, the blonde girl listened to the young lady's words, and her eyes suddenly sharpened. The two looked at each other and did not give in. The black-haired boy sighed silently. He could only pray silently in his heart for the ritual to start quickly. As if hearing his wish, the concentration of magic element in the misty forest under the night began to gradually increase. The guide elves were also restless. It's starting. Yeah. The two girls and Luo Ye looked at each other. They nodded and separated from each other. They followed their guide elves into the forest. Luo Ye looked at the backs of the two girls until the fog gradually covered their figures. Then, it's up to you. Carefully opening the curse box, the little elf who heard Luo Ye's request flew up to the sky and then fell down. After circling the boy a few times, she flew toward the forest. Luo Ye followed closely. With the increase of steps, the concentration of the white fog in the boy's vision became higher and higher. When it reached a critical value, the surrounding scenery seemed to turn into a blank, and then suddenly changed and quickly dissipated. The vision went from blurred to white for about a few hundred meters, but from white to clear was only a dozen steps. Luo Ye, who walked out of the fog, looked around and found that he was already in a forest surrounded by giant trees. Judging from the size and type of trees, it was obviously not the misty forest with twisted branches. It was more vibrant, and even Luo Ye suspected that it was in ancient times. After Luo Ye, more and more students followed the elves to this area. Due to the individual point system and the random allocation of the secret realm, most of the students did not know each other, and there was no idea of forming a team. After keeping a distance from each other, they prepared for battle. The silence in the forest lasted for a while until a wolf howl broke the silence of the night. A woo. Under the moonlight, pairs of shining eyes began to gradually approach from the forest, and the number was increasing. It was a group of mutated demon wolves, and their strength was about source level 6. Their group was widely distributed in various areas of Xia. It was the lowest level of demon. Except for the number, they had nothing to show. Under normal circumstances, their main opponent was the militia. At the moment when they saw such a group of monsters, there were many sighs of relief in the crowd. Generally, the freshmen who had reached source level 5 smiled happily as if they had seen victory. After all, the major dividing line of extraordinary strength was between source level 6 and source level 5. In the eyes of most students, source level 6 monsters were their lives to be killed indiscriminately. However, feeling the relaxed atmosphere nearby, Luo Ye's face became strange. He looked around and found that several students wearing armor also frowned. It seemed that the elimination speed of this opening ceremony was faster than expected. Luo Ye shook his head helplessly, walked to a position with his back against a boulder, and burned a faint curse power on his body. Tonight, St. Freya Academy was a lively night. The reason for the liveliness was not only because the freshmen accepted the baptism of the entrance ceremony, but also because of the situation outside the arena at this time. In the big arena in the academy, it could be said that it was full of people at this time. The senior students were excitedly looking at the projection of the curse vessel on the field, sometimes applauding and sometimes despising. But now they were not watching the battle of the top 20 students, but the first-person perspective of the visual tracking elves in the entrance ceremony. Yes, this was a broadcast, and it was also one of the most popular activities in the academy every year. Chapter 250. On the viewing platform, Lillian listened to Grimm's words and remained unmoved. Her silence was like encouragement in the eyes of the young man. As a pure-blood aristocrat, Grimm had been educated since he was a child that the purity of the bloodline was nobility. The royal family was the best in this regard, especially the gifted Her Royal Highness. Under the three halos of appearance, intelligence, and bloodline, she could be said to be the only goddess in the hearts of Grimm's generation. However, even though Princess Lillian was good, she had a flaw. She was too cold, as if she did not care about anything. Even when Grimm obtained another rose ring for the Austen Empire last year, it did not cause her to feel too much of a stir. However, such an icy beauty had paid special attention to two freshmen this year. One was Paul Aikman, and the other was Luoya Akut, who was in the middle of a battle. Although Grimm hated Paul's situation, he could understand it. After all, he had the bloodline of Aikman. Even if he was not a pure blood, he should be taken care of. However, Grimm could not tolerate Luoya's situation. How could an indigenous barbarian of the Saint Maester theocracy make Her Royal Highness look at him differently? He's just a freshman with an ancient curse vessel. There's nothing special about him. I heard about Carlo and the others. This freshman didn't do it himself, right? Grimm looked at Luoya with a glass of wine and couldn't help but smile when he looked at his empty hands. It's a pity that this kind of curse vessel that can attack autonomously is prohibited in the secret mirror. Without that trump card, he will become immortal again. In the eyes of the first-year students, Luoya was the one upholding justice. In the eyes of the second-year students, Grimm was the one who stood up for his seniors. The inherent superiority of the Austen Empire made him full of prejudice. However, all of this was so naive in Lillian's eyes, even a little ridiculous. As a member of the Austen Empire's royal family, Lillian's identity made it necessary for her to acknowledge the pure blood theory. But deep down, she was actually skeptical of this theory of unknown origin. As for why she treated Luoya differently, it was actually based on the suppression of the curse power back then. As a matter of fact, Lillian wanted to give Luoya, who was approaching Paul, a warning. Lillian's coercion wasn't something that could be brushed off with a smile. With the difference in level, even Green would be crushed by her. But what she didn't expect was that Luoya actually stood her ground calmly. During that short period of coercion, Lillian also discovered something unusual. Although it was only for an instant, Lillian felt as though something in the young man's body was watching her. It was an existence that even she had to pay attention to, which was why she was so wary of Luoya. Arrogance and prejudice can make people careless. Before the humans and the demonic beasts that were in the midst of fighting could react, a sudden change suddenly befell everyone's head. Roar! In the midst of the hoarse and unpleasant strange roar, the sky and earth shook, and the horn of massacre was blown. Violent fluctuations of curse power suddenly came from the trees that the students were leaning against. Giant malicious faces appeared on the trees, and then the branches of the giant trees condensed. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 gigantic trees fell from the sky and hammered the ground. After a long period of observation, the brightest elves in the field had already been locked onto by these terrifying treants. And under this thunderous attack, the group of students who performed the best was instantly smashed into pieces, tragically annihilated. In the midst of the screams and the sound of flesh and blood exploding, the Trent's mouth curled up strangely, as if they were laughing at the stupidity of the humans. However, what they did not see was that in the corner that they ignored, the black-haired youth's mouth also curled up. Amidst the soundless laughter, the lightning and fire formed by the power of the curse swirled around his body and finally turned into a crimson-red light. An ancient giant shadow appeared in the exploding fog, and at the same time, the meteorite-like fist appeared. Boom! In the midst of the explosion of the trees, Luoya's silent guiding spirit light began to rapidly expand, and under the light, the black-haired youth looked up at the dull trance and revealed a smile. Stop pretending, I'll lay my cards on the table. Chapter 251. Oh! In the arena, as the Gulandair smashed the tree with his meteorite, the audience cheered enthusiastically, attracting more and more people's attention. The great tree forest was a pain that most of the students in St. Freya Academy couldn't forget. Many senior students would gnash their teeth at the mention of this place. Compared to its plain name, people preferred to describe it as the Nightmare Forest because it was full of malice. When the students entered the forest, the entire forest seemed peaceful, but in fact, the first batch of monsters had already arrived. They were the evil treants that disguised themselves as trees nearby. What was more infuriating was that these treants didn't attack immediately, but instead, they would scout. They would drive packs of wolves to battle with the students, and through their performance in battle, they would lock onto the stronger students in advance and launch a saturation attack in the second half of the battle. As the saying went, a man proposes but a tree disposes. In other secret realms, the more courageous the students were, the more they would reap. But in the great tree forest, the better they performed, the faster they would die. It was completely against human design. After the human leader was struck by lightning, the remaining students would be powerless even if they banded together. That was why in the great tree forest, they would basically be wiped out every time. However, what was unexpected was that this year, human intelligence had once again occupied the high ground. What was more exciting was the young man who saw through the treacherous plan and the terrifying skeletal giant. The instant the skeletal giant broke the giant tree, everyone's gaze changed. He can win. He might even win. Go! Avenge us! The cheers from the audience continued. Above the crowd, Grimm's face had turned as green as a ring. Being humiliated in front of Lillian made this young ring-bearer feel terrible. But at this moment, Her Royal Highness had no time to care about him. That is, staring at the Gulandair's body, Lillian's emotionless face revealed a rare expression. Her purple eyes widened and she couldn't help but stand up. But Lillian's shock wasn't only for the Gulandair. After all, she had sensed the strange presence before and had guessed it. She was truly shocked by the way the black-haired young man's curse power manifested. This is the creation type. Like me? The black-haired girl couldn't hide the surprise in her heart. As the Gulandair's actions became more and more certain of her judgment, questions began to appear in her heart one after another. Could this be the reason why Lucas forbade her from touching Luoya? Or was it just a coincidence? Although the information about Luoya's extraordinary ability was mostly blank, his father, Kadia, was clear. He was not a creation type, and the forbidden contact with the Akot family also included Kadia, so it had nothing to do with this. While Lillian was speculating all sorts of possibilities in her mind, on the other side, Luoya was going all out. Treants. To the people of this era, this was probably a race that no one knew anything about. However, Luoya was very familiar with them. After all, there was one planted in his house. During the days when he was transporting Cade, Luoya had chatted with him many times. Just like the holy beasts, the treants were divided into two types. The treants who possessed the origin substance were intelligent and kind, while the treants who didn't possess the origin substance were evil and cunning. Moreover, they were extremely thick and liked to incite the creatures around them to kill and absorb their flesh and blood. They would also ambush the strong in battle and put on a show of wanting to take them all. Not long after entering this place, Luoya discovered a large number of skeletons under the roots of the nearby trees. The familiar feeling of curse power made him certain that there were treants nearby, but he couldn't tell how many of them there were. Now that the enemy had jumped out, Luoya could finally show his skills. In the years since Luoya reached level 4 of source rank, he didn't have many opportunities to use his full strength. Now that enemies were everywhere, and the screams of the freshmen were endless, Luoya, who was wrapped in curse power, no longer had any worries. The Gulan Daer attacked again in the shockwave of magic essence. Unlike the cautious Luoya, the Treants were obviously careless. They thought that victory was already decided and didn't pull out the roots that were used as their legs. The immobile Treants were the targets, and the punching giant was the giant. The moment this combination met, the outcome was basically decided. Boom! Another loud explosion resounded through the forest. The curse power on the white bone fist of the Gulan Daer burned like fire, and when he waved it, it was as if his body was accompanied by wind and thunder. The huge body of the level 4 source rank Treant was just a slightly thicker cardboard in his eyes. The moment his fist touched the tree, it was like a bullet piercing through it, followed by the explosion of countless wood shavings. But even if they were weak, the Treants didn't give up resisting. Their huge branches waved, and there were countless air-piercing sounds in the forest every second. A large number of evil Treants wanted to entangle the giant's body. Their roots broke out of the ground one after another, looking for a chance to counterattack. The battle between the giants and the Treants began. The forest of giant trees shook as the two sides fought. The surviving students looked up at the battle above their heads and trembled. This scene was like a myth, and it was obviously beyond their understanding of the opening ceremony. In the arena outside the secret realm, the atmosphere had reached its climax. This boxing match, like live broadcast, stirred up the emotions of everyone present. Every time the Gulan Daer knocked down a Treant, it was a celebratory cheer. Everyone, the name of the new student has been found. Luoya Akat, let us send encouragement to the warrior who punishes the evil Treants. Oh, oh. Luoya. 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 The host of the publicity department worked overtime at the last minute and shouted loudly. What followed was a tsunami of responses. The hot-blooded youths who imitated the movements of the Gulan Daer raised their arms high, and the number of students shouting Luoya's name increased. Hurry up and change the odds. Hurry up and change the odds. Looking at the screen, the banker's face turned ashen. The odds for Roha Akate in the list of candidates began to drop rapidly, but even so, there was still an endless stream of people buying. The students raised their gold coins and placed their bets, boldly spending a lot of money. Spells and fireworks rose into the sky to liven things up, and the gorgeous light illuminated the faces of many teachers and students above the audience. On the rooftop, Chris laughed loudly, holding a cigarette and waving his fist. Chapter 252. What was the most important thing in a one-on-one duel? Equipment and tactics were undoubtedly very important, but if Luoya had to choose one of the many conditions, then he would choose attributes. It was not the wind, fire, and thunder attributes that restrained the attributes. The world of Shiya was real, not a game. The extraordinaires had a variety of curses, and as the degree of mutation deepened, more or less there would be a physical bonus. Their battles with each other were not just about making fireballs, but often ever-changing. There was no such thing as a weak extraordinaire. Even the group of semi-disabled people from the puppet school who couldn't move by themselves were more than enough to fight a tiger empty-handed. Luoya's attribute restraint was more inclined to the restraint of position, such as the current situation. Boom! A huge roar echoed in the open space in the woods. The fist of the huge skeleton collided with the lance and rolled up a whirlwind. The broken leaves and branches rushed into the sky, but before they fell to the ground, they were once again swept up by the shock wave. The black-haired boy stood on the ground at this time, looking at the armor on the opposite side. He couldn't see the specific appearance, but it was obviously a knight's extraordinaire phantom. He was uninterested and didn't even bother to move. Roderick Osborne, this was the armored man that Luoya saw through the skill, the former ring-bearer phantom. There was no doubt that Luoya's luck was relatively good. He met a strength-type ring-bearer, and to some extent, this type of physical attack was what he was best at dealing with. The fierce confrontation shook the forest, and the earth on the ground began to shatter and disintegrate. After dozens of rounds, the huge skeleton and the knight were evenly matched. Luoya observed the other side and carefully analyzed for a long time. He had almost evaluated the strength of the other side. The battle of extraordinaires wasn't about piling up attributes. If curses were weapons and curses were bullets, then the most important thing was undoubtedly the person who used the weapon. If the person was stupid, everything else was in vain. Perhaps he found that he couldn't defeat Luoya under the protection of the Goulandaire. The tall knight pointed his lance forward, and destructive curses began to gather. It wasn't until this moment that the black-haired boy's golden pupils suddenly shrank, and at the same time, his face suddenly became strange. Should I say that those who can become ring-bearers have some ability? Hee, interesting. Luoya muttered to himself, and Goulandaire beside him also agreed. The black-haired teenager stared at the heavily armored man opposite him, and his heart was in turmoil. You're dressed like this, and you're actually playing a game. That's right. Although Luoya didn't know which era Roderick was a ring-bearer, or his specific identity and background, there was one thing that Luoya was sure of, and that was his character. This was a cunning old fox. The heavy armor, the lance, and the tall physique were all feints. The speed at which the power of a large-scale spell was extracted was an important factor in determining whether a supernatural individual was more inclined towards spells or physical abilities. This ring-bearer named Roderick had obviously undergone long-term training in this area. Perhaps even Luoya wouldn't be as efficient as him. This person's true identity should be a cursemancer of the Energy School. The Energy School was one of the oldest schools of thought. It emphasized on following the most basic destructive nature of each person's curse power, reducing the consumption of conversion, and pursuing the greatest power. To put it bluntly, it was the light cannon style. Condense and blast out. If there was no conversion, then there was no consumption. It was normal to be blasted to death, but if there wasn't enough power to blast to death, then it was normal. Of course, when it came to practical application, the Energy faction had many secret manuals, and it was far from being as simple as one would imagine. For example, the famous technique, Hidden Collection, was an ultimate move that could be used to silently store up the curse power in the middle of a battle and suddenly release it. After all, it was impossible for other factions to secretly store up a big move while fighting. This person's physical ability should be brought about by his bloodline. Yes, a strengthening-type bloodline user, and a rather powerful one at that. Goulandaire gave a rare compliment. The next moment, the light of destruction suddenly erupted, and the beam of curse power broke through the distance of hundreds of meters with a rumbling sound. In the midst of the explosion, there was a loud explosion in the direction of the forest where Luoya was. In the scattered white light, the knight's movements stopped for a moment, but the next moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked up. Above the dim night sky, a golden light was shining in the starless sky. It crossed the sky and kept rising, moving directly above Roderick. It was the black-haired boy with irregular light wings on his back. Angel's Gift, this was one of the abilities that Luoya and Noair hatched together through the short blade of the Holy One a few years ago. It had the effect of dispelling negative statuses. Luoya often used it to neutralize the immortal state caused by summoning the Goulandaire, but the other flying ability was rarely used. The whistling sound of the wind was ringing in his ears, and the rapidly falling temperature made Luoya's body feel slightly cold. The boy who slowed down looked back at the sky. At this time, Roderick's body had turned into a small dot. Luoya saw this and smiled slightly. The golden light around his body disappeared, and he turned into a red killing star. It's about time. I've been wanting to play like this for a long time. The boy chuckled. His body was pulled down by gravity, and at the same time, the blood-red light on his body extended and turned into a huge demon god. The mist was blown away by the wind, and the falling giant skeleton made a sound as it rubbed against the air. The red star turned into a meteor and fell from the sky. Under the huge shadow, Roderick's body moved again. He raised the light cannon on his lance again, but this time, the light beam could no longer threaten Luoya. The white bone fist was getting bigger and bigger in Roderick's vision. The explosive curse power and the huge potential energy shattered the golden light beam from the sky. Chapter 253. In the fog, the black-haired boy stared at the blood-red name that suddenly changed the environment. Although he couldn't see the person clearly due to the fog, just the name alone was enough to cause a huge impact on Luoya. Roy Akot. This was an unforgettable name for the Akot family. It represented one of the most prosperous periods of the family. Vincent's era was too far away from the present. In the past few hundred years, the Akot family leaders had tied the glory of the family to Roy, the chosen one. Luoya could be said to have grown up listening to Roy's stories since he was a child. Luoya, who understood Roy's journey, naturally knew that this ancestor had also studied at St. Freya Academy. However, there were no records of the specific situation in the Akot family. As for encountering such a thing during the opening ceremony, Luoya thought about it before, but he didn't care. There was no other reason other than the probability was too low. St. Freya Academy had been established for more than 900 years, and the number of ring-bearers was estimated to be more than 1,000. The possibility of encountering a family member was negligible, and it was still unclear whether Roy was an ring-bearer or not. From a certain point of view, Luoya's thoughts were correct. He didn't encounter Roy through the normal channels, but it was obvious that the current situation was abnormal. The return after defeating the ring-bearer didn't trigger, but instead seamlessly connected to the hills and plains. Recently, there were strange fluctuations in the mysterious realm. Chris's words echoed in the boy's mind, and Luoya immediately became alert. The mysterious realm only had one effect on the Night of the Devil, and that was to nullify death and injury. Then, after the fluctuations, would this function still exist? Luoya didn't know the answer to this question, and he didn't want to use his life to verify it. He stared at the blood-red light that represented the killing intent, and almost reflexively, the curse power exploded. Sensing the threat from the outside world, the Gulan Daer and Pei Tila had already made their move. This feeling. It's also the crown. Little guy. Get behind me. A hoarse and dignified voice and an anxious female voice came one after another. Gulan Daer's huge body appeared at the forefront, and the giant snake made of rocks used its body to encircle the youth. The two ancient gods looked forward at the same time, and under everyone's gaze, the fog that covered the figures finally dissipated slowly. Under the fog, a young man with long black hair appeared. He was tall and slender, wearing an old-fashioned suit from a few hundred years ago. He wore boots, and there were a few medals of honor pinned on his chest. His long cape and black hair fluttered in the breeze, and his golden eyes shone like stars, adding a layer of dignity to his slightly weak face. It even gave him a feeling of finishing a dragon. So beautiful. When the fog dissipated, Luoya felt the most direct and truest feeling in the bottom of his heart. The black-haired youth was stunned. He never thought that Roy Akate, the ancestor of his family more than 300 years ago, would actually kill him at first sight in this unknown secret realm. His black hair fluttered in the fog, and a strong sense of danger and a weak face complemented each other. This sharp contrast and unique temperament brought Luoya a shock that was almost comparable to Ai Lizzie and the others. From the medals on the chest of his clothes, when Roy obtained the shadow, he should have been attending a grand ceremony in the academy, so he didn't bring any weapons. This was undoubtedly good news, but with the bloodline of the Akate family, whether or not he had a weapon didn't affect his combat strength much. Luoya stared at the figure in the distance with a myriad of thoughts in his heart. As if sensing Luoya's gaze, the black-haired youth raised his head slightly. The moment the golden eyes met, Luoya's pupils contracted slightly, and he suddenly had an extremely wonderful feeling. At the same time, Pei Tila's shout suddenly sounded. Not good. Don't look at his eyes. Mother Earth reacted quickly, but it was too late. The moment he looked at Roy's eyes, Luoya's consciousness seemed to float out of his body, and there was a sense of unreality. His movements and expressions seemed to freeze at this moment, and his curse power rapidly decreased. The light on his body was extinguished visibly. The shouts of Gulan Daer and Pei Tila could not reach his ears. The bodies of the two ancient gods disintegrated as Luoya's curse power contracted. When the breeze blew again, there was nothing around the youth on the hill. On the other side, the black-haired youth also stepped forward and strolled in the direction of Luoya. Illusion, this was an ancient curse that had existed since ancient times. But with the passage of time, the ancient fantasy creatures gradually died out, and this terrifying curse gradually declined as it was lost. The scariest thing about illusions was that they were silent and hard to break, especially when the enemy was alone. The ancient illusions were the curse of death, burying the enemy in the blink of an eye. Ranks were meaningless in front of this ancient curse, and the effect of bloodline was minimal. Illusion was an examination of one's heart. Whether it was a high and mighty god or a mediocre mortal, they were all equal. At this time, Luoya had fallen into a long dream. At this time, Luoya was sitting in a seat in the cinema, staring at the constantly changing screen in a daze. The soft seat made him feel very comfortable, the surround stereo sound had a sense of sophistication, and the fragrance in the air was relaxing. Luoya's mind was blank, like a disc waiting for content to be recorded. The constantly changing image in front of him was the data, and the youth naturally began to watch it. It was a short but long story that belonged to the youth alone. The realization of his own fate, the pursuit of the cultists, the mountains of corpses on the streets of the holy capital, the blood on the deck of the ocean, the destructive disasters and unknown enemies, and difficulties appeared one after another, as if there was no end to them. Looking at the busy youth, Luoya could not help but think, this should be enough, right? How long more do I have to work hard? It's almost time to rest. Chapter 254. On the hill, Roha Akat's golden pupils stared at the shadow of his ancestor from hundreds of years ago silently. After the fatal genjutsu was broken, Roy's genjutsu no longer had any effect on him, and the boy's return ceremony officially began. Frozen Earth. Amidst the majestic voice, the curse power in Luoya's body exploded into the sky along with the wave of frost. The majestic life force began to transform into a booster at the critical moment, causing his strength to rise steadily. In an instant, he had reached the peak of source level 3. When Luoya broke free from the illusion and found that he was still on the plains and hills, he understood that this was no longer the gentle and refined demon encounter night but an unknown place where one would truly fall into death. Therefore, the young man did not hold back at all. At the same time, two huge figures wrapped in curse power appeared angrily. The roaring giant swung his fist the moment he appeared, and the eyes of Mother Earth emitted a fatal light as she stared at the enemy. The meteorite-like fist fell from the sky, and the legs that touched the ground were quickly petrified. In addition to the pincer attack, there was also the frost that seemed to freeze the world. All the attacks arrived at the same time, and the situation Roy was facing could be described as hopeless. However, despite having such an obvious advantage, Luoya's expression did not show the slightest carelessness or relaxation. It was only because of the Akat family's bloodline that he never fought alone. Amidst the buzzing sound of the air vibrating, thousands of rays of light suddenly rushed out of Roy's body. The petrification effect of Pei Tila disappeared in the light. As the light wings spread out, holy and majestic energy soared into the sky with a tall figure. When Luoya saw the figure, his gaze instantly turned solemn. An angel. Not a person with an angel bloodline like Noah Iyer but a real angel who served Shia in ancient times. The light that went against the flow rushed toward the fist of the Gulan Daer, but that was not all. After the angel, a deep beast roar sounded. Roar. Amidst the howls that shook the surroundings, a giant wolf that looked like a phantom appeared out of thin air. His body seemed to be weightless as he floated out and landed on the ground before turning into a solid form. The phantom wolf ran towards Mother Earth, and behind it, the long-haired youth's body was already wrapped in bright flames, creating a huge conflict with the surrounding cold air. On the dusky ground, the roars of beasts mixed with ice and fire could be heard. The giants and angels were wrestling, and the flames of war were everywhere. The death match in the mystic realm was still going on, but outside the mystic realm, it was a peaceful scene. The students who participated in the preliminaries were eliminated one by one due to their defeats. They were led out of the misty forest by the guide sprites. Some people were dejected as they looked at the guide sprites that were not as bright as the lights, while others were in high spirits as they looked at the sprites that were much brighter. Regardless of whether the results were ideal or not, the admission ceremony that belonged to them was over. The teachers and senior students began to record the results of the freshmen separately, while more people were silently waiting for this year's finals to enter and face the shadow of the Sentinel. Everyone was curious as to how many geniuses would be able to survive in the new year. However, in the Mystic Realm monitoring room, the teacher's attention was attracted by something else. The wave value is rising, it's still rising. It's going to break through the second warning line. Damn it! What the hell is going on this year? What the hell is going on? The roars of the monitors echoed in the room, and the entire monitoring room was in chaos. It was hard to believe that just 10 minutes ago, they were still drinking tea and chatting. The Mystic Realm monitoring room was a department in the academy that was specifically responsible for monitoring the stability of the Mystic Realm, such as the Night of the Demons, ensuring the safety of the Mystic Realm, and assessing the danger level. For many years, the team had completed their tasks well and had rich experience. However, today, an unprecedented emergency suddenly struck. The Mystic Realm, which should not have caused much fluctuation according to the combat standards of the freshmen, shook violently in an extremely short period of time. At first, the monitors did not think much of it, and only sighed at the strength of this year's freshmen. However, the moment the wave value broke through the first warning line and did not turn back, everyone's expression changed. The last time the wave value broke through the first warning line was not too long ago. It was just 2 years ago, when the Purple Rose Lily's battle caused a violent tremor on the Night of the Demons. However, even the fluctuations caused by Her Highness the Empress battle only caused the wave value to break through the first warning line for a few seconds. But now, the wave value was rising steadily. It's already broken through the second warning line. It's still rising. It's still rising. This wave is not something a student can cause. If this continues, the Mystic Realm will explode. Roars and shouts echoed in the room, and everyone's brain nerves were oppressed to the point of dizziness. The stability of the Mystic Realm was related to the special effect of the Night of the Demons. Once it completely collapsed, the freshmen who were challenging the Guardians would lose their lives and become invalid. And now, the students who were challenging the Guardians were the Princess of St. Meister and the daughter of the President of St. Louis. If anything happened to them, quickly inform the emergency department. No. The monitoring room director, whose face was as pale as paper, trembled as he thought of this. He slammed the table and gritted his teeth as he shouted. Activate the Level 1 emergency alert. Go directly to the Dean. Chapter 255. What was the most important thing in a battle? Was it hot-bloodedness? Was it bravery? Was it perseverance? No, neither was it. Luoya felt that the most important thing in a battle between transcendents was calmness. The timing of the attack, the degree of power needed, the target's trump card, and the possible price to bear, everything needed to be measured in advance. From all these perspectives, Roy Akot, the ancestor from hundreds of years ago, was the most powerful opponent Luoya had encountered so far. Since awakening his bloodline, Luoya had never felt that he could lose to someone of the same level, but there was no doubt that Roy was an exception. The two of them had their own advantages in different fields. Unlike Luoya, who had spent his life to reach source level 3, the beautiful ancestor in front of him was a true source level 3. His understanding of his curses and bloodline was also at source level 3, and his application was far stronger than Luoya's. The evidence was the golden crown fragment that strengthened the ancient gods, which was a skill that Luoya had yet to master. But in comparison, Luoya also had his own advantages, and that was the strength of the Gulan Daer and Pei Tila. Whether it was the king of giants or the Earth Mother, their strength was obviously higher than that of the ancient gods opposite them. Even after being strengthened by Roy, the two sides were only evenly matched, so the outcome of this battle was destined to be Luoya's side from the beginning. The black-haired boy stared at the ancestor, who looked even more beautiful under the reflection of the flames. That delicate beauty made it difficult to distinguish between a man and a woman in the night, and it had a unique neutral temperament. Unfortunately, Luoya did not have time to appreciate the ancestor's magnificent beauty now, so he focused his gaze on the raging flames on his shoulder. The moment the boy saw the flames attached to Luoya's body, he understood that the ancestor in front of him actually had 3 ancient gods following him, but the third one had not fully appeared yet. Instead, he cooperated with him to use the flames to fight Luoya. There was no doubt that this was abnormal. The full combat strength of the ancient gods was worlds apart from the current half-baked situation. In fact, these flames could not completely offset the frost of the frozen soil maker. In the previous intense collision, Luoya had turned the other party into an ice sculpture more than once, but every time he killed Roy, he would be reborn like the mystic wolf in the sky. Immortal body. When this phrase appeared in Luoya's mind, he was close to despair, but soon reason prevailed. There was no such thing as immortality in this world. This kind of power that defied common sense must be accompanied by harsh conditions and costs. This was Shia's iron law. There must be something that he had overlooked, and that was the key to victory. With that in mind, the black-haired young man carried out a large number of experiments. After defeating his opponents several times, he had a complete train of thought. Why is Roy willing to take a beating and not release this ancient god of fire? If it is to resist Luoya's frost, it is completely putting the cart before the horse. According to the nature of this resurrection, there is no doubt that it comes from the ability of that phantom beast. So what is the use of this flame? Stretching out his palm to release the frost to block the huge flame fist, Luoya looked at the ancestor below again, and a flash of realization appeared in his eyes. It's the shadow. The role of the flame is just a cover. What Roy really needs is a light source. This is the condition for his infinite resurrection and the reason why he did not let the ancient god of fire appear and leave. Countdown to skill, 19, 18, 17, there's only one strike left. Feeling his vitality, the black-haired boy muttered to himself. After more than 10 seconds, Luoya would fall back to level 4 of the source rank and enter an extremely weak state. At that time, even with the protection of 2 ancient gods, he would almost certainly die. The only way to survive is to win. Luoya's golden eyes lit up as if they were ignited at this moment. In the silent silence, the most powerful attack so far arrived in this secret realm. When he stretched out his hands, the entire space seemed to be controlled by the gods. It quickly became hazy in the vibrations, and the collision of the frost and the air created a white mist that spread like an explosion and then circled around the two of them. The white mist above the plane was like a tornado, and the huge momentum and terrifying spell fluctuations attracted the attention of all the gods. The angel in the sky stopped the entanglement of the spell, and the phantom beast landed on the ground again. The Mother Earth straightened up and looked anxiously, and the huge skeleton could not help but turn its head. All the strong people present understood that the real battle was about to decide the winner. Under the cover of frost, the black-haired boy's hands faced each other, and the waves of disaster converged into a frost-like heart in his palm. Heart of frozen earth, this was the product of Luoya's year of using the attributes of the frozen earth creator's crown stone to the extreme. The resplendent heart was like a work of art, but the small creation represented the eternal frozen earth calamity. The moment it appeared, Roy, who was wrapped in flames, suddenly stopped. The shadow person looked down at his chest with a stiff expression. In front of him, Luoya's palm also grasped the light, and then suddenly clenched it. Chapter 256. On the plain, two youths who looked somewhat similar fell to each other, and in the distance, the ancient gods fighting collapsed and left one after another. Holding the saint's dagger in his hand, the black-haired youth was covered in wounds, but there was a faint smile on his face. It had to be said that although his injuries were miserable, Luoya was in a good mood and even had a unique sense of accomplishment. When Luoya started this round of attacks, there were only 10 seconds left before the end of the skill. At that time, there were still two possibilities for Roy's immortal body because theoretically, there were two ways to eliminate the shadow. One of them was naturally to completely extinguish the light source. As everyone in this world knew, there would be no shadow without light. The other was a concept that did not exist in Shia, there would be light without shadow. If it was the first situation, then Luoya had many ways to restrain the other party, such as blocking the moonlight with a thick fog. But after thinking about it, Luoya felt that the possibility of using this method to break the immortal body of the ancestor was not high. There was no other reason. It was too simple. As a hero of a generation hundreds of years ago, how could Roy's life-saving skills be so simple? If it could be broken so easily, then Luoya felt that it would not be as useful as his weakened immortality. Therefore, Luoya was prepared for the second situation when he attacked, and the second requirement of completely erasing the other party's shadow was indeed much more difficult than the first. How could a person eliminate a shadow? There were probably not many people in Shia who could give a perfect answer to this question. Even though there were many uses for shadows in curses, there were none that could eliminate shadows because shadows did not have the nature of curses. However, Shia did not have any research in this area, but Luoya had something in his previous life that could roughly do it. The shadowless lamp was an important invention of the medical field in Luoya's previous life. It was mainly used in surgery. The principle was to reduce the umbra by using many light sources. It was not truly shadowless, but it was enough. Although Roy's skills were powerful, just like the laws of this world, powerful skills had harsh activation conditions. And facts proved that Roy's immortal body could not be activated with the invisible shadow under the dense light. After the initial death illusion, the competition between the ancient gods, and the personal battle, Luoya finally won and defeated Roy, who was at the source level higher than him. Even if this Roy was a fake without enough intelligence, this was enough to make him proud. The real Roy would probably hide the secret of immortality better and conduct a certain degree of verbal interference and inducement. TSK, what a monster. Luoya sighed in his heart and tried to sit up with his arms propped up. However, before he could take a breath, a voice with a hint of laughter behind him made his body completely stiff. Don't say that. I'm a little sad. Under the night breeze, Luoya looked back at the thin figure standing behind him and fell into a daze. There was only one question in his mind. Why did he speak? As a shadow person in the secret realm, Luoya was completely sure that Roy, who fought with him before, did not have a consciousness. Or rather, all the guardians in the secret realm did not. It was because of this that they lost to the proud sons of heaven who were at the level of source level 4 despite their strength. But now, the fake in front of him spoke, and most importantly, the expression in his eyes changed. Luoya looked up at the black-haired youth's helpless but somewhat warm eyes and could not help but gradually widen his eyes. There was no doubt that the person in front of him was a real person with a conscious personality, and this inexplicable sense of intimacy. It was the real Roy. Luoya pointed at the youth in front of him and did not know what to say. On the other side, Roy sighed slightly. Although it's just a doll with my skills, I didn't expect it to be defeated. Should I say, as expected of a descendant of the Akate family? What's your name? Luoya. The long-haired youth sighed. He looked at Luoya's young face with complicated emotions in his golden eyes. He was only at the level of Source Level 4, but he could do this, and those two ancient gods. Roy looked at the descendant in front of him and narrowed his eyes slightly. Although it was not much, he still had a slight impression of the shadow person in the battle. Not to mention the magical refraction formation that Luoya used to turn the tables, the two ancient gods that followed him were far beyond Roy's expectations. Even in the Akate family, those guys were not easy to find. In the end, it was very difficult to collect relics. But if one did not collect relics, the risk of blindly drawing was very high. Because compared to collecting relics and having a certain amount of authority, blindly drawing with bloodline required one to talk to the ancient gods, and the ancient god standards were generally very high. Chapter 257. On the plain, the black-haired boy looked at the old ancestor who was patting his shoulder and fell into silence with a stiff expression. The wind was blowing, and the grass was flying. The wound on Roy's chest was bleeding, and Luoya was looking at his bright red lips, thinking about a question. How can you use such a cute face to say such dirty words? Ancestor, what did you say? I said to make a woman from the Aikman family pregnant. Okay, don't say any more. Luoya stretched out her hand to stop Roy's next words. She pinched her eyebrows, feeling a headache. Didn't you leave a message on Cade saying, don't trust Aikman? Indeed, I have the same idea now. But what does impregnating an Aikman woman have to do with trusting their family? Of course it has something to do with it. Luoya glared at the calm Roy, her face red and speechless. Impregnating her? Isn't that the same as getting married? If you don't even trust her, how can you get to that point? You don't have to get married. Cough, cough. I mean, you have to think about it yourself. Roy hurriedly changed his words under the gaze of his descendant. For a moment, he felt a headache coming on as he looked at Luoya. Obviously, this descendant of the Akate family was better educated, had a higher moral standard, and had a higher sense of responsibility. He probably wouldn't impregnate someone without giving her a proper status. Roy was actually quite satisfied with this. After all, good moral character was the foundation of everything, especially as an awakened of the Akate family. Having a dirty heart was equivalent to giving enemies a chance to attack, and sooner or later, he would die an unnatural death. However, although having a good moral character was good, it was a disadvantage for the mission Roy gave him. Observing Luoya's blushing face, Roy couldn't help but shake his head slightly in his heart. Looking at this shy look, he probably hasn't even held a girl's hand before. Roy looked at Luoya, who was snatched by the girls every day, and his heart was filled with worry about the Akate family having no descendants. However, what he did not know was that Luoya did not hold hands much because he was usually the one being held. Looking at this youth who didn't reveal anything and didn't take the initiative to attack, old ancestor Roy felt a headache coming on. Without a doubt, as a member of the Austin Empire's royal family who believed in the pure blood theory, it was unlikely that the women of the Ackerman family would have a good impression of the men of the Akate family. They might even be on guard against them. If Luoya was a veteran in the field of love, it would be fine. But he was so inexperienced, how could he? Roy, who couldn't think of a good solution after thinking for a long time, was extremely anxious. In the end, he couldn't help but grit his teeth and stare at Luoya. I don't care what method you use. I just want you to have a child with Aceman's blood. If you can't get it, then I'll just snatch it away. Roy, who had given up on his plan, was rather helpless. He didn't think that Luoya would work through normal means, but fighting was a different matter. In his eyes, Luoya couldn't pick up girls, but fighting was very good. As the saying went, use one's strength to attack the other's weakness. If he couldn't get it through normal means, then he could only snatch it away. As long as he succeeded, the Ackerman family, who was thousands of miles away, could only suffer in silence unless they went to war with the theocracy. Of course, the Akate family wouldn't be able to leave the country in the future. This matter didn't require any precise emotional manipulation. The only difficulty was whether he could successfully snatch it away. Roy was very confident in Luoya on this point. She was just a woman from the Ackerman family. How strong could she be? Roy grinned and scoffed at the Ackerman family's combat strength. However, he didn't see Luoya's dull expression when she heard his good idea. Snatch Lilith Ackerman to be the wife of the fort. Heh heh. You're really a clever little devil. Luoya looked at her ancestor, who had an expression that said, "This isn't difficult at all." She really wanted to ask him, "Ancestor, why do you want to end your line?" Lillian Ackerman was a genius who had reached third source level at the age of 16. If Luoya remembered correctly, Roy had also reached third source level at the age of 16. Most importantly, unlike the previous retarded version of her ancestor, Lillian had an extremely high IQ. If Luoya really used her skills to fight with her, there were basically only two possibilities. Lillian killed Luoya, or he accidentally killed Lillian. The two possibilities were equally likely. There was no other way. Based on the strength that Lillian had displayed previously, Luoya would die if he held back. However, if she used her full strength, all of Luoya's moves were basically killing moves that couldn't be saved. After hesitating for a long time, Luoya still didn't tell Roy that this woman of the Ackerman family was a peerless genius. Instead, she asked another core question, which was why Roy wanted Luoya to marry a woman from the Ackerman family. However, she didn't expect Roy to shake his head at this question. Chapter 258. Is he gone? On the plains, the young man who was gradually recovering held the ring in his hand and looked at the light spots floating in the sky. For a moment, there was an indescribable sadness in his heart. Although he knew that Roy was no longer in this world, leaving only a trace of his consciousness, and the two did not talk for a long time, the closeness that originated from their bloodline, the same goal, and the same purpose made him identify with Roy, and Roy did not hide his kindness to him. In the end, Akkad still had too few blood relatives. He was alone in almost every era, not to mention that Roy was also an awakened, a blood relative that transcended generations. It had to be said that Roy's prodigal personality that did not match his heart left a deep impression on him, but Luoya could clearly feel the sense of responsibility under that frivolity. His appearance provided Luoya with a lot of clues that could no longer be found in this era, and the help he provided was indescribable. From Vincent to Roy, and then to Luoya, the three awakened bloodline of the Akkad family were like a relay, peeling off the historical truth layer by layer, eager to find the truth, change the current situation of the family, and their own fate, and even seek the stability of the human community. Perhaps Vincent and Roy did pay the price with their lives in this process, but their efforts were not in vain. Luoya, who inherited the information left by the two ancestors, would continue to explore. Perhaps one day he would also encounter a desperate situation, but even so, he was not willing to give up. The result of 1,000 years of accumulation could not be destroyed in his hands. This was Luoya's will, and also his thought when he received the Black Rose ring. All the side effects in his body disappeared, and the spell power that was consumed by the explosion was replenished as if time had reversed. Even his torn clothes gradually recovered. This surreal scene made Luoya realize the magic of the Night of the Demon again. But then again, Roy actually used his own shadow to protect the ring. Didn't this mean that he did not want to give it to anyone? How could a freshman deal with such a pervert like him? Or was this a screening mechanism, and only the awakened bloodline of the Akkad family who defeated his shadow would be able to make him hand over this important clue about the scholar, with peace of mind? If that was the case, then his ancestor must have cheated in order to keep the ring a secret. Luoya looked at the two rings in his hand and secretly guessed. Soon after, he shook his head. No matter what, it was more important to get out of here as soon as possible. Thinking of this, the young man called out to the guiding spirit in the sky. When he realized that the fatty couldn't find his way for a while, he sighed helplessly and reached into his pocket to light Chris's lamp oil. Then, he followed the guidance and walked out. At the edge of the dense fog forest, chaos had just ended. A large number of elites from the emergency department were evacuating in batches. Dean Antonio was also observing the situation nearby. Chris stood on the rooftop and looked in the direction of the forest. He heaved a sigh of relief and prayed that Luoya would be fine. Everything happened after the preliminaries. When the freshmen were challenging the shadow of the Guardian, the Demon Knight suddenly began to fluctuate violently. At one point, it was close to the final warning line and was about to collapse. In the face of such an emergency situation, the Secret Territories Monitoring Room activated a Level 1 alert. The school's emergency department was dispatched in full force, ready to rush in and save the freshmen. One must know that the challengers now were not the ordinary aristocrats of the past. They were the Noa Iyer Princess of the Theocracy and Miss Sorophia Rose. If something really happened, the implications and the depth of the impact would be unimaginable. In fact, the atmosphere at the scene was extremely solemn. The old director of the monitoring room had a heart attack on the spot and was directly carried away by the school doctor. Fortunately, this violent fluctuation only lasted for a short while before it disappeared. Dean Antonio seemed to have grasped some inside information and did not seem to be worried about it. After the secret realm stabilized, everyone's nervousness gradually dissipated, and the Night of the Demons once again returned to its original trajectory. At this time, in the periphery of the misty forest, there were thousands of freshmen and seniors who had just come out. They were waiting for the results of this year's competition, or rather, for the birth of a new ring-bearer. Among them were the nobles of the Theocracy and Rose, freshmen who were waiting to ride on someone's coattails, seniors who were not doing well, and even a large number of gamblers who were waiting for the lottery to open. The opening ceremony this time could be said to be the gathering of expectations from all sides. Not only were the Theocracy and Rose waiting for their leaders, but the freshmen were also looking forward to the birth of a new force. After all, St. Freya Academy currently had a ring-bearer in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years. Ideally, the freshmen would have a ring-bearer as well. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the freshmen. The ring-bearer's exclusive training ground and exclusive buildings were all shared by the faction. This was a substantial benefit, and there were countless hidden benefits such as connections within the faction. If the first years did not have a ring-bearer, then they could only compete with the second years for the Green Roses quota. It would be much more difficult to compete with the seniors for a job. Time passed by as everyone waited in anticipation. In the temporary room of the security department nearby, a black-haired girl clutched her chest with a depressed expression beside an overturned cup. Since the fluctuation of the mysterious realm began, Lillian's body had a strange reaction. She could not calm her restlessness at all, and it was getting more and more intense. Originally, as the bearer of the Purple Rose Ring, Lillian should not have come here. After all, the king would not meet the king, and paying too much attention to the new ring-bearers would make her seem weak. But an inexplicable anxiety led her to come here. What was the reason? Why would the fluctuation of the mysterious realm affect her mood? And what's with this feeling of losing something important? Lillian frowned, her eyes full of confusion. But unfortunately, this anxiety of feeling that someone important was in danger was destined to be a feeling that she, who had never experienced much familial affection, could not understand. And just as Lillian was vexed, footsteps gradually sounded in the misty forest. The freshmen who challenged the shadow of the sentinel returned one by one. But unfortunately, most of them were sighing in despair. Suddenly, a strong fluctuation of spell power appeared, guiding the light of the elves to shine in all directions. After a moment of silence, the crowd waiting nearby realized something and suddenly let out a shocking cheer. The victors had returned. Chapter 259. When the brighter guide's spirit rushed out of the forest, the senior students who had witnessed the entrance ceremony several times almost reflexively cheered. The guide's spirit was not only a guide, but also a tool to score points in this mysterious realm. The brighter the guide's spirit was, the more curse power it absorbed, which indirectly meant that it defeated more and more powerful enemies. Now, the light of the guiding spirit that floated out of the forest had expanded to the point where an adult could barely fit it. This was something that the previous guiding spirit that was only the size of a basketball could not compare to. And this level of light also represented the birth of a new ring-bearer. With the crowd's excited gazes, the silhouette of a person walking out of the dense fog forest gradually became clear. Not long after, a young girl with reddish-brown hair and emerald eyes strolled out under the gazes of tens of thousands of people. Then, a burst of exclamation resounded from the crowd. It's Miss. It's the girl from Ratchet's side. As the crowd clamored, Xia Luot walked out of the misty forest with a smile. Her beautiful eyes quickly scanned the crowd, and when she found that Luo Ye was not present, she sighed in disappointment. After the fierce battle, the girl hoped to see the appearance of her sweetheart welcoming her. In fact, Xia Luot had already thought about it. If Luo Ye was here to wait for her, she would let Luo Ye put the ring on her finger. Although Xia was not like Luo Ye's previous life, where different fingers had different meanings, just putting a ring on a lady's finger was enough to show the intimacy between the two, just like the ancient practice of giving daggers to each other. Generally speaking, this kind of behavior would only happen between lovers. But man proposes, God disposes. Xia Luot did not expect that her sweetheart, who she thought would quickly defeat the shadow of the sentinel, would come out later than her. Maybe he met someone difficult to deal with. The reddish-brown-haired girl thought and sighed. Saint Freya Academy had produced many talents for thousands of years, and it was normal for there to be a few ring-bearers who could fight or who were good at delaying battles. What's more, they were all fighting above their level, so it was understandable that they would come out later. Of course, Xia Luot also had another acquaintance who did not come out, such as a certain Miss Angel, but it was obvious that the reddish-brown-haired girl did not want to see her at all. Shaking her head slightly to get rid of the disappointment in her heart, Xia Luot raised her hand in front of the crowd, and the curse power flowed into the ring in her fingers. The next moment, a sparkling red light bloomed in the exquisite rose-shaped ring, followed by the crowd's cheers and thunderous applause. It's the red rose. We have the red rose. Oh! Long live the miss. As Xia Luot showed off her rose ring, the crowd below was completely immersed in excitement. The nobles on the rose side cheered, and the freshmen breathed a sigh of relief. The teaching staff talked with each other, admiring the talent of the Sorofia family's Mississippi. Although the Sorofia family had been famous for a long time, because their main talents were focused on divination and astrology, and because the family's inheritance was cut off, the Sorofia family had only produced one ring-bearer in 100 years, and Xia Luot was the second. It could be said that she had won glory for the whole family and made the Rose nobles proud. The cheers at the scene continued, and Xia Luot was surrounded by people. All the freshmen wanted to leave an impression on this ring-bearer of the same level, especially the seniors who failed to achieve their goals. However, before this wave of cheers subsided, a new guide sprite rushed out of the forest, causing a second round of exclamations in the crowd. That's a new guide sprite, someone else came out. This one is even brighter. The noise and discussion exploded when the second guide sprite appeared. There was no doubt that this guide sprite with a brighter light could only mean one thing, and that was that another freshman had successfully defeated the ring-bearer's shadow and obtained the ring. Under the expectant gaze of the crowd, the blonde Miss Angel successfully appeared. The light in the fog became brighter and brighter, and in the next moment, Noah Iyer, with a pair of wings of light behind her, flew out of the forest and soared into the sky. Amidst the exclamations of the crowd, she slowly floated down with the guide sprite. At the same time, she stretched out her hand and showed the rose ring on her finger, which was emitting a golden light, to the crowd. The golden rose. Another ring-bearer. Xia above, long live the princess. Another round of applause rang out. The students of St. Mestre in the academy shouted and waved the national flag, while the students of the Austin Empire were more indifferent. Overall, the freshmen were still in high spirits, and the entire forest was filled with a celebratory atmosphere that was different from the gloomy fog. Noa Iyer also frowned as she did not see Luo Ye during the process of landing. She looked at Xia Luot, who was surrounded by people on the other side. When she saw the red rose ring on her finger, her gaze became slightly vigilant. In the end, she still got it. But forget it, it was expected. The blonde girl withdrew her gaze. Now that they had obtained the ring, Noa Iyer and Xia Luot, as the future successors of their respective countries, should not quarrel with each other. Instead, they should communicate with the students of their own countries and accept their congratulations. It was necessary to communicate with subordinates and use honor to enhance the cohesion of the team. This was something that the leaders of a group had to do. However, now that they were carrying out their duties, they had to divert some of their attention to silently observe the situation in the forest, waiting for the person of their dreams to appear. Others might not be familiar with Luoya, but Noa Iyer and Xia Luot had experienced the historical journey with him. They were fully aware of Luoya's combat strength. The Guardian's shadow was only a weakened version of the Source Tier 3. It was not a threat at all. The two victors were full of confidence in the young man, but on the other side, Chris was a little anxious. She could not help but light up another cigarette. As an old single woman who had not spoken to her seniors for more than 10 years, Chris had been holding back for the entire afternoon, but she still could not think of what to say to Kadia. After careful consideration, she realized that the only thing that they had in common was Luoya, and Luoya's entrance exam was no doubt a good place to start. Chapter 260. In the square outside the forest, the crowd had already fallen into a frenzy. 3 ring-bearers, this was the highest number of ring-bearers in the same batch in the history of St. Freya Academy. The last time 3 ring-bearers appeared in the same batch was more than 100 years ago. In the square, the financial staff of the academy looked at each other. The birth of 3 ring-bearers at the same time meant that the academy would have to fork out a large sum of money for subsidies, and their workload would increase by a lot. For the freshmen, this was undoubtedly great news. Just like when Luoya's previous life's campus recruitment, there was a giant company. And it turned out that this company was indeed a giant. The oversized guide sprite floating in the sky, its size far exceeding everyone else's, could only mean one thing, and that was that its owner had defeated an enemy whose strength was beyond imagination. And in the eyes of the guild leaders and the academy's mentors, this was what was truly worth paying attention to. Chris looked at the guide sprite with a dull expression. If she remembered correctly, according to the records, the largest guide sprite in the history of the Academy's entrance ceremony should be about 3 meters in diameter, and this white sun now, without even looking, knew that it was far larger than the record. A genius. A genius with a limitless future. And a local noble, the kind that could be pulled in. At this moment, the old men on the various platforms who were previously dispirited all became excited at the same time. Their waists were no longer sore, their legs were no longer painful, and their hunched backs could be straightened. Almost at the same time, the 8 immortals crossed the sea, each showing their magical powers, and rushed over with all their might. The guild leaders were very anxious, but the academy's mentors were even more anxious. Joining a guild was up to you, and there was a lot of uncertainty, but if a student wanted to find a mentor, it was a matter of fact. With Luoya's ability, it was almost certain that he would become famous in the future, and when that time came, it would definitely be beneficial to the mentors themselves. The guild members and the academy's mentors came down one by one, but at this time, Luoya did not care. The youth was experiencing an unprecedented feeling, bathing in the cheers. It had to be said that whether it was in Akat Hill, the holy capital, or Rose, Luoya had never experienced such grand cheers, let alone the elites of the same age from St. Freya Academy. It was the highlight of his life. It would be a lie to say that he was not happy. It was better to say that he was very happy. But at the same time, Luoya did not forget the 2 girls who were waiting for him. Surrounded by the crowd, Nua Ayer and Xia Luot smiled at the boy. Because Luoya belonged to the Church of Saint Maester and was a close neighbor of the United Nations, the students from both sides had a good impression of him. Among the crowd, Paul was also squeezing forward, wanting to congratulate his friend first. I didn't expect that the random person I met on the way to school would be such a big shot. My school life should be much better than I imagined. Paul sighed in his heart. He followed the freshman who wanted to be the first to leave a first impression on Luoya. But after looking around, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Why are there so many girls? Sensing something, Paul slowed down his pace. On the other side, Nua Ayer and Xia Luot, who were surrounded by the crowd, suddenly became serious. They stared at the blushing girls in the crowd and clenched their fists. It started again. It started again. After Luoya obtained the rose ring and received attention, a large number of vixens had appeared due to the huge exposure. They were starting to form groups. Faced with this situation, the two girls naturally wouldn't let it go. They waved their hands and immediately gave the order to stop them. However, what they didn't expect was that before the two girls' subordinates and the crowd of freshmen rushed in front of Luoya, a group of old men suddenly descended from the sky and surrounded the black-haired boy. This student, I am the representative of the Transformation School, Richardson Herman. I don't know if you know anything about our Transformation School. If you are willing, how about I show you around our headquarters tomorrow? Don't listen to him. I am the representative of the Energy School, Powell. The Transformation School is something only sissies learn. A real man's romance is only explosive. Nonsense. Only a monkey without intelligence would rely on brute force. Transformation is the choice of a wise man. You people from the school, please make way. I am a regular teacher. This student, what do you think of potionology? I am a potionology lecturer and mentor, Pierre Auger. I think you are very talented. Of course he is talented, but it is definitely not potionology. Luoya, I am the mentor of Curse Protection Studies, Frank. I think you should know that the most important thing in a real battle is always your own life. If you can defend against it, you won't need potions. Extremely stupid. Do you think potions can only be used for treatment? There are many times when a man needs potions, not just on the battlefield. In front of Luoya, who had yet to react, the old men from the various schools met on a narrow path. The professional mentors of the academy were also enemies on a narrow road. All kinds of persuasion and cursing filled the black-haired boy's surroundings. As more and more old men and women flew over, the scene was a little out of control. The school leaders who had never interacted with each other and the mentors who had grudges gathered around Luoya. The war of words between them became more and more intense. If there was a disagreement, it would become a war of words and let Luoya see who was better in actual combat. Noel and Charlot were dumbfounded at the chaotic scene. The freshmen who were rushing over did not know what to do. There were 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Amidst the group of seniors in the air, the black-haired youth was exhausted from dealing with them. He felt more tired than when he fought with Roy previously. The square was crowded with people, and on the top floor of the building temporarily requisitioned by the security department, the black-haired girl behind the curtain was silently looking at the boy who was being robbed. It seems that he is safe and sound. Lillian Aikman thought so and suddenly realized that the turmoil in her heart had calmed down. The girl thought for a while but still could not figure it out. She could only shake her head and look out the window again. Although Lillian had long expected that Luoya, the 3rd ring-bearer, would appear, she had to admit that Luoya's strength had exceeded her expectations. With the rise of this new star, the number of first-year ring-bearers would occupy half of the academy. Their influence and strength would expand in one breath. Don't get close to the Akate clan. The girl had to admit that she could no longer fulfill this order. Under the friction between forces, Lillian and Luoya's contact was inevitable. Chapter 261. A week later, St. Freya Academy's Commercial Street, Broken Sword Tavern. At dusk, the commercial street was bustling with people. The doors of Broken Sword Tavern were constantly opening and closing. With the increase in popularity, the tavern had a lively atmosphere. The sound of wooden cups clinking could be heard constantly. The owner's greeting and the aroma of wine filled the air. In the corner of the second floor, a young man in a hooded cloak looked at the smiling red-haired woman in front of him. "I say, Teacher Chris, is it okay for you to bring me to this kind of place?" Aren't you an adult?" "That's not the problem." Luo Yaz'akat carefully looked around. At this time, the sun was setting, and the number of customers in the tavern gradually increased. The single customers at the bar were chatting and tasting wine, the two seats against the wall were chatting and laughing, and the new customers were curiously looking at the collection on the wall. Broken Sword Tavern, as its name suggested, was a tavern decorated with hundreds of broken swords on the wall. On the outside, it was an inconspicuous building made of stone and wood, but in the commercial street of St. Freya Academy, which had existed for hundreds of years, it was very famous. It was said that the owner of this tavern was a swordsman who lost all his companions in an adventure. He was also seriously injured and could no longer go on adventures. Disheartened, he returned to his former academy and opened this tavern. He kept the broken swords that had been with him for many years and placed them on the wall to show that he would never leave and move forward together. The owner's behavior was praised by many knights. Since then, this tavern had a rule. If the owner was willing, he could hand over the broken swords to the tavern and give the retired swordsman a place to stay. After so many years, there were hundreds of broken swords, and each one had detailed information next to it, and even a message from the original owner. Of course, this kind of secret and low-key tavern was basically impossible for new students to find. In fact, most of the people who entered the tavern were returning customers, senior students, teaching staff, and other staff of the tavern. This made the black-haired young man under the cloak greatly relieved. "I'm afraid of being seen, and it might cause trouble." Sighing helplessly, the black-haired young man reached for the cup on the table and took a sip of wine. The pale blue ring on his finger flashed under the dim light. The blue rose was probably the most popular term in St. Freya Academy. Ever since the entrance ceremony a week ago, Luoya's life had sunk into another level of fierce battle. On the second day of the opening ceremony, after the official award ceremony, Luoya was besieged by various schools, student organizations, and the academy's instructors. Blocking the door was a common occurrence. Various temptations were offered, and some even tried to seduce her. Of course, this kind of insensible trash was immediately eliminated by the two new ring-bearers, the Golden Rose and the Red Rose. But even so, the academy was still in turmoil. The dormitory that Luoya was assigned to this batch of new students was heavily monitored every day because of him. And in the dormitory, there was an endless stream of people who wanted to establish a relationship with him. 1 week after the entrance ceremony, St. Freya Academy gave the students time to familiarize themselves with the campus, choose the subjects they wanted to study, and report the course allocation. During this time, the students could choose one of the academy's instructors as their instructor. It was a bit like choosing a class teacher. 1 week seemed to be a long time, but considering the thousands of students choosing their major, the academy collecting their wishes, reporting and sorting, allocating teaching resources according to the situation, and a series of other things, 1 week was considered fast. And for Luoya, this week was the most aggressive week of the academy's instructors. Because he was not familiar with the schools in the country of scholars, Luoya did not want to get involved in this field. As for the issue of instructors, Luoya naturally chose Chris, who gave him the lamp oil so that he could return safely. And from another point of view, Chris was indeed one of the best choices as the academy's sage instructor. It was just that it was not appropriate to say this out loud because it would bring a lot of trouble to Chris. So in the past few days, Luoya had been wandering around through the relationship between the theocracy and Rose. He was quite jittery these days. Looking at the blue rose, who had caused a sensation in the academy a week ago, but was now a little scared because she was blocked at the door, the red-haired woman could not help but laugh. I know you've been chased by those old things recently, so I brought you here to relax. After all, you'll be my disciple after tomorrow's announcement. Chris was in a good mood as he drank a mouthful of wine. He was very proud of his action of looking for Luoya in advance. He didn't mention his original purpose of looking for trouble. As expected of me. The woman nodded and crossed her arms proudly. Then, she pointed to a corner of the wall. Of course, there's another reason other than relaxing. I brought you to this corner for that. The black-haired youth followed Chris's hand and looked to the side. In the next moment, he couldn't help but be stunned. On the wall next to Luoya, a slender broken sword was hanging on the wall. Looking at the style, it should be modern. Because of the maintenance spell, it didn't look old. Instead, it looked like it had just been broken. At the bottom left of the sword holder, there was a line of simple description in small print. In November of the year 988, it broke in the ruins at the foot of the Fu'er mountain range. With this sword, it saved 3 people. Dia, the first time I came to this tavern, it was my senior who brought me here. Now you know why I brought you here. Chris smiled and looked at the broken sword on the wall. Her face was full of nostalgia. Opposite her, the black-haired youth was already dumbfounded. What's going on? Senior? My father? Wait, could it be that before, Luoya looked at teacher Chris who was opposite her? The conversation between the two of them a week ago started to appear in her mind. Her face couldn't help but gradually become strange. That. Teacher Chris, how's your letter coming along? What's the content? Chapter 262. Ringbearers were, to some extent, the highest position in St. Freya Academy. They were an honor that the students earned with their own strength and could not be stripped away. Compared to them, even the dean could be replaced. Of course, the dean could only be replaced in name. In reality, it was impossible. Even if Antonio were to get Alzheimer's from today onwards and dress up as a woman and go square dancing every day, it would take a year and a half to replace him according to the normal procedure. As the Blue Rose who had the highest grades in history and fed the guide elf the most, Luoya's treatment was naturally not bad. In fact, when the academy gave this record holder his own building and training ground, he was given the choice to choose. This kind of right to choose was very comfortable. St. Freya Academy provided Luoya with many choices, but there were 3 that were the most tempting. The first was a tower in the main campus, the second was a villa complex by the lake, and the third was a manor by the mountain far away. In terms of area, although the tower was tall, it had the smallest area nearby. The manor included the forest beside it, so it was much larger. The largest was the villa complex by the lake. As long as he took it, the whole lake would be Luoya's. But as the saying goes, quality is more important than quantity. In terms of land value, every inch of land in the central campus was worth gold. It was the busiest area in the vast St. Freya Academy. The food street was so close that it could be seen with the naked eye. The commercial area was also very close. All kinds of campus activities were held here, and it had a somewhat urbanized feel. Without a doubt, with this place as the base of Blue Rose's faction, he could fully enjoy the life in the academy. He could go downstairs and eat the food from the specialty stalls in the campus. He could immediately know about the discounts in the commercial area. He could participate in campus activities when he went out, and watch concerts when he opened the window. Every day, he could sleep in until 10 minutes before class started. This was the ideal campus life for many students who lived in remote dormitories. With convenient transportation, one could enjoy one's youth to the fullest. If it was in his previous life, Luoya would definitely have bought this place on the spot. However, in Shiya and St. Freya Academy, a training ground related to supernatural powers was also a very important factor. In this aspect, the tower was not suitable. It was obvious that a large training ground could not be built in this central area. On the other side, the villa complex by the lake was much cheaper, but the accommodation conditions were the best. Basically, it was a single small villa with a beautiful view of the lake. It was a sacred place for couples to date. If there was nothing to do, they could even go boating. The school's aquatic activities and projects were all carried out here. The training ground was connected to the land and the water, and it was very wide. For students who cultivated water-related spells, it was the best choice in school. It was about half an hour's walk from the center of the academy. It would take more than 10 minutes to move with the unique curse vessel train in the academy. The distance could only be said to be neither too far nor too close. It was similar to the suburbs, and it was similar to the various dormitory areas. There were no convenient attributes. The last one, the manor in the mountain, was not worth mentioning. The location was close to the edge of the academy. It could be said to be relatively remote. It took a few hours to walk from the center of the academy. Even if one took the curse vessel train, it would take an hour to get there. The transportation was very inconvenient. But in contrast, the whole building was quite magnificent. The interior decoration was also very luxurious. It was said that it was built during the heyday of the great aristocrats of Austin in the past. The training ground was quite large. Of course, these attributes were all secondary. What really gave this building an advantage over the other two was the mountain where the manor was located. To put it simply, this mountain had a secret realm. Watcher Valley, this was a special secret realm that could only be entered near the mountain forest like Demon's Night. However, unlike the completely safe Demon's Night, this secret realm, which seemed to have a much milder name, was actually dangerous, but the probability was relatively low. Every time Watcher Valley opened, the team that entered would be forced to apply a special life-binding curse. Unless everyone died, they would be forcibly petrified when they were fatally injured. They would become a watcher waiting for their teammates to rescue them. In this case, after eliminating the monster, they would be pulled out of the secret realm to remove the petrification. But if the entire team was wiped out or stayed in the secret realm for more than 3 days, then the petrification would be automatically lifted. The person who was fatally injured would basically die. In general, this secret realm was not very dangerous. As long as there was a person at the entrance who could escape at any time to report the news, they could more or less avoid being wiped out. But occasionally, people who entered would go too far, or like the victims in the records, were buried because the terrain changed during the battle and could not be found. Then, they would really be dead. For a long time, because of this reason, Watcher Valley had not been included in the practical teaching of the academy. After all, losing a battle in this secret realm was equivalent to going missing. A few small teams would be fine, but if thousands of people were scattered all at once, hundreds of people would go missing. Even if the search and rescue team knew the location, they would be exhausted to death. It was certainly not possible to use it on a large scale, but it was still barely usable for the actual combat of a small elite team. After all, if they wanted to engage in actual combat, they would have to follow the mentors or ringbearers on missions. In that case, there was no guarantee that they would be in danger. Such 3 options were placed in front of Luoya. For a time, he was quite hesitant. But as the saying goes, you can't have your cake and eat it too. After careful consideration, Luoya decided to choose the manor with the secret realm. There were 3 main reasons for choosing this place. The first and most important reason was that Luoya had analyzed the composition of his faction members. As a noble of the Saint Mestre theocracy, Luoya was originally the second in command of the Nu'a Iyer group. Normally, he should be managing the faction on behalf of Her Royal Highness. But now that he had become an ring-bearer, he naturally could not work for Miss Angel. After all, ring-bearers were equal in name. But even if he did not work for them, he could not poach from the corner of the Saint Mestre theocracy. Similarly, the elites of Rose were under the jurisdiction of the two girls. So after careful consideration, Luoya targeted the local civilians, the children of merchants, and the lower-born nobles. This group could be said to be the most hard-working group in the St. Freya Academy. Most of them did not have anything to inherit after graduation, so they entered the academy to improve themselves. As a person who had been forced to constantly improve himself from a young age, Luoya was very willing to provide a channel for these hardworking people. Of course, Luoya was not a pure Mr. Nice Guy. The second reason he chose this place was to recruit a group of talents for Akat Hill. After all, these students who did not have the inheritance of their ancestors needed to find a job after graduation. And as the acting lord of his own territory, Luoya could directly make the decision to recruit people without any notice. The third reason was the problem of the secret realm. As a secret realm, the Watcher Valley was not completely safe. There were many problems, but the main problem was that it was difficult to find people. But this problem was not a problem for Luoya because he had the help of Pei Tila. Where were the people buried? The search and rescue team could not find them, but how could the Mother Earth not find them? The most difficult problem to solve in the Watcher Valley was not a problem for Luoya at all. Because of this, Luoya chose it. On the other hand, Luoya was also full of interest in the existence of the secret realm. After making a clear choice, the academy began to send special staff to clean and renovate the building. It would take about half a month. Luoya did not need to care about this. It was better to say that he was busy with other things now. Yesterday at the Broken Sword Tavern, Luoya, who chose not to interfere, drank a lot with Chris. After re-examining the character of this mentor, he finally came to the conclusion that Chris was really a very pure person. Whether it was liking or disliking, Chris never hid it. Generally speaking, he was the same on the surface. It was just that he had developed some bad habits after so many years of being heartbroken, such as smoking when he was anxious. But compared to that, he had more advantages. The most obvious one was his attentiveness. In order to let Luoya catch up with his classes as soon as possible, he even found a senior to tutor him. In St. Freya's academy, after choosing a mentor, they would have to attend the mentor's class. However, unlike the other majors, the mentor's class was attended by students of all grades. The content of the class differed according to the mentor, and among them, Chris's classroom was famous for its high difficulty. If there was no help, even if Luoya had a certain foundation, it would probably take him half a year to gradually integrate into the class. But if there were senior students to tutor him, it would be a different story. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.